Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, Lettuce Head Fanfics. Back with amazing fanfiction. This is the series of What if Deku became a Thaumiel class entity? Please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Izuku had always been a strange kid. For as long back as Midoriya could remember, her son wasn't normal. The way he spoke and acted always seemed so detached from the world. The things that would scare any other child, spiders, ghosts, and the dark, Izuku responded to it all with enthusiasm. And then there was the matter of his birth. It wasn't a memorable event or anything, and that was the problem. She simply couldn't remember where her own son came from. Inko had never seriously dated, always too dedicated to her career. When she tried, she couldn't remember what hospital Izuku was delivered in, nor the details of the day he was born. It was all just blurry. Some days she would sit on the couch at home, staring at baby photo albums, searching for memories she could never seem to grasp. But then, inevitably, Izuku would run in with some new bug or feral animal he had caught outside, and the ensuing panic would make a few missing memories the last of her concerns. And that was just the kind of person her son was. Sure. Strange? Absolutely. But he still always had a smile that would light up a room, and he viewed everything and everyone with such love that she simply looked past all other warning signs. That wasn't always easy, mind you. When Izuku was 4 and the rest of his friends were getting quirks like explosions, or stretchy fingers, Izuku gained something far more complicated. The doctors called it imaginary friend, the power to summon creatures and objects only found in a child's imagination. They all assured Inko that it was a fine quirk, and that imaginary friend quirks are usually harmless. But Inko knew better. She had seen the horrors her son could unleash. The tentacled beasts, the long, gangly arms, and objects that radiated auras of death. Once, Inko had dreamed of a man dressed in strange business clothes, from a pre-quirk war, who had begged her to give his dear friend extra dessert at every meal. He described the firestorms of war that would come about from a failure to comply with his demands. She then awoke to a toy robot pulling her hair and beeping annoyingly. Oh, how Inko hated that robot. The next morning, she told Izuku no more summoning friends in the house, especially in her dreams. Things got quieter around the house after that. Still, she swore that some nights, after he had been tucked in and wished sweet dreams, that Izuku would whisper to his uncle a good night too. But whenever Inko followed his gaze, she was met with nothing but an empty room. Yes, Izuku was a strange kid. But regardless of everything, Inko loved her son. Making friends was Izuku's favorite thing in the world. Give him enough time, and he could convince anything to be friends with him, even plants, animals, and villains. To Izuku, everything was friendship material. He had an almost magnetic personality, brightening any room he was in, and feeling such empathy for all living things. Sure, the kids might call him creepy for talking to trees and lizards, and maybe he scared his human friends that time he brought some fresh roadkill for show and tell, but everyone has their quirks. And speaking of quirks, Izuku absolutely could not wait to get his. Kaken already got his and everyone told him it was a perfect quirk for a hero. Izuku couldn't be more proud of his best friend. After all, Izuku loved heroes. Especially All Might. He could save everybody and be the perfect hero. He was unbeatable. Until the day he wasn't. Izuku remembered the day vividly. He had been watching All Might compilations on the computer at 2 a.m., just like he always did. Suddenly a live symbol popped up on the HeroTube channel. Ever a curious 4-year-old? Izuku clicked. The live broadcast was blurry, and the lighting low due to the late hour. An urban battlefield sprawled across the camera. 2 figures just barely visible in the dark. Still, the imposing figure of All Might shone clearly through the screen, a glow of red, blue, and yellow, the symbol of hope. Izuku's excitement at seeing his idol was cut short by a bone-chilling voice rising above the crackling static. Observe, champion of mortals. Your adoring fans are watching your final days live. All Might looked into the camera across the rubble-laden street. He appeared ready to retort, but only coughed up a mouthful of blood. And upon closer inspection, The paragon of heroics was clutching to his side, hand covered in deep red liquid. This can't be happening. Izuku thought. All Might is indestructible. He can't be hurt. Still, the villain dressed in black took another step closer to the kneeling hero. Over 2,000 to my name, and I only need one to level this entire city. Nuclear fission. 14%. The villain raised his arm and grinned, teeth glowing in the green light cast by the orb of energy held above his head, the orb slowly growing in size and intensity. I won't let you. All Might called, standing to his wobbling feet. Kill me if you wish. But leave the people of this city to live in peace. With that, All Might unleashed a flurry of blows onto the villain, who appeared mostly unfazed. Your actions are futile, my dear nemesis. The villain sneered, the orb above his head already the size of a bus. You will die tonight, regardless of your pathetic attempts at struggling. All Might pulled his arm back into a fighting stance, his fist glowing red from sheer heat. That may be so. But if I die tonight, I'm taking you down with me. And with that the hero sent a United States of Smash directly into the orb of radiation. The villain's eyes grew wide, as his unflappable facade broke for the first time in the course of the dialogue. With a flash of light and explosion of noise so loud Izuku was convinced the computer's volume was set to 100 rather than 10, the live feed dissolved into static. A few seconds later, Izuku felt the building beneath him rumble slightly, evidence of a battle's conclusion miles away. Stunned, Izuku clutched his All Might action figure and sat in silence. Eventually the shock broke and he began to sob, tears rolling down his face as he willed the computer screen to show him that his hero had won, that All Might was alive. But no such change happened. The live feed simply cut to black, unceremoniously. All Might, come back. You need to be a hero, please. Izuku called into the empty room, with nobody to hear him but his action figure. Or that was the idea, anyway. Hello. I'm Princess Blossom. Are you my prince? A voice asked from behind Izuku, who promptly spun around in his chair to identify the mysterious voice. Nobody should be in his apartment but his mom, and she was asleep. The princess was standing just behind Izuku, wearing some kind of ball gown and tiara. The strangest thing about her, however, was the soulless quality of her voice and gaze. No, my name's Izuku, the boy whispered, ever unaware of stranger danger. He wiped his eyes best he could, smearing snot across his pajama sleeve. The lady did seem to register the boy's words, instead seeming fixated on the toy he held. She pet her head, and with a flash of light the action figure had disappeared, and before him was a muscular man, dressed in bright colors and flashing a grin so bright it hurt Izuku's eyes. I am here. The man yelled. The princess was gone, and therefore out of Izuku's mind at the sight of his idol standing before him. Izuku stumbled out of his chair to give the hero a hug. All Might, you're alive. And in my house. I am here, was the hero's only response. Please. You need to keep being a hero, All Might. You can't ever stop. Them here? The man said, tilting his head to the side like a cat or a broken toy. Yeah. You need to be here for everyone. You aren't dead, so you need to get out there and be a hero. Save people with a smile. I am here. All Might yelled triumphantly and promptly leapt out of the office's window, leaving a gaping hole in the wall, chunks of plaster and brick raining down on the street below. Izuku stared in awe at the destruction his hero had left in his wake, and only thought, that was awesome. All Might is so strong. With that thought, Izuku yawned and toddled off to his room. He was only 4 after all. Tonight's excitement was exhausting. Once in the comfort of his room, he curled up on his bed to sleep. The last thing he saw under his half-lidded eyes was an impossibly tall, gangly dark figure in the corner of his room. Something about that felt comforting to Izuku, so he smiled as he closed his eyes and fell right to sleep. When Midoriya awoke the following morning, she got her son fed and dressed and sent him off to kindergarten. When she opened the door to her office, however, she was met with a cold breeze and a new open-air view of the city street. A chunk of brick falling from the top of the hole punctuated her scream. Only a princess doll was left behind, evidence to the death of an innocent wall. SCP-8502. Item hashtag SCP-8502. Object class, Thaumiel. Disruption class, Amida. Risk class, critical. Special containment procedures. Due to the dangers posed to the Foundation as whole by applying traditional containment measures to SCP-8502, the subject is currently awaiting containment by Foundation personnel until a viable method can be found. Given the unconditional support and loyalty of all known anomalies SCP-8502 holds, the utilization of any SCPs to contain SCP-8502 is unauthorized. SCP-8502 may be as weak as a young human child, but any attempts to neutralize using physical force may be met with support from a healing or resurrecting anomaly, such as SCP-006 or SCP. The event of the extermination of SCP-8502 may result in an XK-class end-of-the-world scenario, evidenced by the agitation displayed in all monitored anomalies during instances of harm faced by SCP. One possibly viable method of containment is instances of SCP-3396-01, publicly known as Quirked individuals. SCP-8502 has not shown any significant influence over instances of SCP-3396-01, and the versatile array of instances may prove useful in containment efforts made towards SCP. Due to the volatile nature of the situation, SCP-3369-01 personnel should not be mobilized without a direct threat posed by SCP-8502 to civilian lives. If a significant danger is posed, Foundation personnel have authority to authorize agents possessing SCP-3369-01 abilities relating to possession, mind control, or otherwise halting the functional capacity of SCP-8502 without causing it any lasting physical harm. Description: SCP-8502 has the appearance of a young boy of Asian descent, notable features being green hair and eyes. The entity has been described as a cinnamon roll by personnel despite lacking any resemblance to pastry. Possible mimetic effects of SCP-8502 are to be investigated further. SCP-8502 is referred to by human entities as Izuku Midoriya. SCP-8502 appears human to all others but has no existing records of either birth or existence prior to redacted. While the possibility of a time, reality, or document manipulation effect may be in play, the likelihood of mimetic influence is greater, and thus SCP-8502 should be considered a non-human entity until further testing. SCP-8502 has the ability to unconsciously summon SCPs, even those in Foundation containment, to its current location. The subject has also displayed the ability to summon extradimensional and esoteric class entities. In moments of extreme emotional turmoil, SCP-8502 has shown the ability to summon entities of relevance to its immediate needs, as seen in the event of SCP-137's release into public. SCP-8502 broadcasts a trans-dimensional signal described as an old brass trigger or switch clicking 3 times prior to conscious summoning. All known anomalous entities with some form of sapience or sentience in containment have shown a reaction to this signal. No means known to Foundation researchers can block this signal at the present. Thaumiel classification has been granted to SCP-8502 due to its calming nature on even the more violent entities. While in his presence and with his instruction, SCP-8502 could potentially convince even Archon-class anomalies to work towards the protection of humanity. Further experimentation is required. Footnotes: extreme public scrutiny of the hero, All Might, dictates that SCP-137 cannot be currently retrieved without the possible leak of Foundation existence to the public. When Izuku showed up to preschool, he couldn't wait to tell Katsuki about how he had met All Might. "You're lying!" Kaken yelled, when Izuku had finished his rambling story. "There's no way All Might was at your house, you're just a liar." Izuku felt tears prickle at his eyes. Friends don't call their friends liars. I wish I could show Kaken that I really did meet All Might. I'll prove it to you. All Might and I are friends now, we had a whole conversation. Izuku retorted. Though he had no idea how he could prove anything, he was now dedicated to making Katsuki admit he was wrong. There's no way a creepy Deku like you made friends with the number one hero. The increasingly angry boy shot back. Like he would ever choose you when he could hang out with me. A long white grub of some sort landed on Katsuki's head. You Kaken? There's a friend sitting on your head. Izuku told the other boy. You mean another one of your imaginary friends? I'm not buying it, Deku. They don't exist. Katsuki's tirade ended with the worm's attempt to make its way inside of his ear canal. He screamed as he pulled at the slippery bug. Get it out. It's in my ear. Katsuki yelled, discussion of imaginary friends set aside. Not until you say sorry for calling me a liar. Izuku retorted, suddenly feeling stubborn. What the heckin' flip? Katsuki screamed, as the grub made one final pull out of his grip, disappearing inside the ear canal. It's in my brain. All the yelling had attracted the kindergarten teacher. Now what in the world is going on, young man? All of this screaming simply isn't appropriate. A worm went into Kaken's ear. Izuku stated matter-of-factly, pointing at his panic-stricken friend. The teacher paled, probably already thinking of how she was so about to get fired for this. Let's get you inside then, shall we? Go see the nurse. She led the boy inside, as he hollered about how his head hurt. Izuku felt bad for him, but strangely vindicated all the same. When Katsuki returned to kindergarten sometime the next week, it turned out that tapeworm treatments worked for whatever was in his ear, even though it certainly wasn't your average parasite. Izuku asked his friend if he still believed that he made up the meeting with All Might. Yeah. Katsuki said. Come on, Kaken. I'm telling the truth, really. No, you can't have met All Might that night because I saw him. And All Might can't be in two places at once. Wait, Kaken, you saw him too? Izuku asked, eyes widening. That's what I said. That night I remember being at your house for some reason. Anyways, then a weird lady turned into All Might and jumped out the window. But that's exactly what happened to me. Izuku said indignantly. You can't call me a liar for saying All Might was in my house when even you say he was there. Yeah, whatever. The point is that you weren't there. All Might only talked to me because I'm going to be the number one hero. At this point Izuku decided the battle wasn't worth it. Bakugo Katsuki would be an amazing hero after all. Okay, Kaken. If you say so. When Izuku's quirk got diagnosed, Katsuki started putting some pieces together. It was on a field trip to the Mustafa Natural History Museum that he confronted Izuku about it all. You were the one who summoned the worm that got into my brain, weren't you? I know it gave me your memories when it was in there. He angrily whispered at Izuku while they paraded through the astronomy exhibit. So you do admit I was the one who met All Might? Izuku exclaimed triumphantly. Quiet down, boys. We're in a museum, so keep the volume low. Their teacher called, who miraculously kept her job after the brain worm fiasco. That's not the point, Deku. The angry boy hissed. I'm telling you that your quirk is creepy. You just summon worms and useless stuff. That's not true. I can summon big friends too. Izuku retorted, crossing his arms. Prove it. Katsuki dared, poking Izuku in the chest. I'm not allowed to summon my friends in public. The doctor said so. Izuku said matter-of-factly. Katsuki harumphed and dragged the smaller boy into the closed doors for the planetarium. The room was closed for the day, the lights dimmed until the space show set to begin in a few hours. Now nobody can see your so-called big friends. I don't know, Izuku said weakly. Izuku's moral dilemma was cut off before he could make a choice. The door behind the two boys creaked open, and both turned around in fear of being discovered in an off-limits area. But whoever was approaching behind them wasn't their teacher. You really messed up by coming in here all alone, the man said in a gravelly tone. He closed the door to the dark room behind himself. He wore a black, nondescript hoodie and sunglasses despite the dimness of the planetarium. Everything about the man screamed, stranger danger. While Katsuki was understandably wary of the man and said nothing, Izuku and his aforementioned lack of fear was unhindered. I'm so sorry, Mr. Izuku was cut off by the man's lunge for the boy, holding his large hand over Izuku's mouth as a green gas poured off it. Hey! Let go of him! Katsuki yelled, hands sparking as he rushed the man, and threw feeble punches at his arm. That hurts, brat! The man yelled, and shoved Katsuki roughly to the ground. Strong as the boy was, there was nothing he could do to stop someone 5 times his size. Izuku's eyes were slipping closed as the sleeping gas worked its way through his system. "Don't hurt Kaken," was all he could manage to mumble out through the man's hand and the thick gas. With that, Izuku fell unconscious. Target secured. The man said to himself, "I guess it's time to sweep away the evidence now, glad there's no security footage in this room," he said as he slid a handgun from under his hoodie with his free hand. He pointed the weapon directly at Katsuki on the floor, who froze at the sight of it. A bullet never left the gun's chambers. Instead, Bakugo Katsuki was forced to watch a scene that would make a horror movie enthusiast nauseous. For behind the man in black another figure stepped from the shadows. When the man followed the boy's eyes to over his shoulder, he paled immediately, apparently recognizing the figure. It stood over 7 feet tall, pitch black and jagged all over. The creature moved, fast as a shot, gripping the man's arms with long limbs and twisting them until he had dropped both Izuku and the weapon. "No," was the last sound the man made as the entity proceeded to pull and twist the man's neck, then arms and legs, stretching him into something deformed. His bones popped and groaned, as new ligaments grew in, longer and crooked. Katsuki watched in abject horror, unable to move an inch, as the long, dark figure hunched over the unmoving corpse sprawled out next to Izuku, as every conceivable joint he had was stretched beyond recognition. The sound was the worst part. Every snap, every pop jolted Katsuki's senses back into the present, back into the scene before him. After what felt like centuries of this, Izuku stirred to waking on the floor. "Kaken? Happened?" he said groggily, rubbing his eyes. In the span of time it took for Katsuki to shift his attention to Izuku, the long, dark entity had disappeared. A stretched-out corpse was all that remained. Izuku turned to the remnants of the man on the floor, and that was what scared Katsuki most of all. Izuku didn't flinch. He wasn't scared, or even slightly upset at the sight of a dead man. He looked at it with the same level of emotion one might show to a discarded tin can on the street. Nothing. Izuku turned back to Katsuki. For a second, there was nothing human behind those eyes, only darkness. Then, like a switch had flipped, his sunshine smile was back, hand outstretched to his friend still on the floor. "Here, Kaken, let me help you up." Katsuki slapped Izuku's hand away. "Get away from me, Izuku." He scrambled up to his feet, and promptly pushed past Izuku and out of the door, screaming his head off all the way. Izuku stood alone in the room, staring at his hand as tears began to prick his eyes. While the smell of copper slowly permeated the air, he cried because his best friend had pushed him away once again. Bakugo Katsuki wasn't okay. Everyone and their uncles seemed to be asking Izuku and him, "Are you okay?" After they discovered a dead body in the planetarium. The police, EMTs, and heroes on the scene all asked him, and he gave the same answer every time. No. When his parents and Auntie Inko showed up in a hurry, a serious-looking detective led them to a break room in the museum, as she told the parents she had questions for the boys, sitting wrapped up in shock blankets. "First, I just want you to all understand that if this conversation gets too hard for you, we'll stop immediately. You both clearly just went through something terrible. Knowing that, are you feeling up to answering a few questions for me?" "Yup," Izuku said joyously, provoking a strange look from the detective. "Poor boy, probably still in shock," Katsuki's dad whispered to himself. Katsuki piped up, "I don't need to answer your stupid questions. Just arrest him already. He's a villain." The angry boy pointed a shaking hand towards the boy sitting across from him as far as possible in the room they were in. "Well now, young man, that's a serious accusation to make against your friend. Why do you say he's a villain?" The detective probed. "Yeah, brat." Mitsuki Bakugo, Katsuki's mother, reprimanded. "How dare you call poor Izuku that?" Can't you see how much he's been through? Izuku only quirked his head to the side in response, confused. His creepy quirk killed that dude. I saw it with my own 2 eyes. Bakugo responded angrily. I did that. Izuku asked, pointing a finger at himself and looking to all the world like a lost puppy. But I was sleeping? Yes, young Bakugo. Young Midoriya here inhaled some of the person's sleeping mist quirk. Hallucinations were a possible side effect. Is it possible that you imagined it? After all, your friend has an imaginary friend quirk, and those kinds of quirks don't work without focus. It would have been impossible for him to do anything while he was asleep. The detective countered. Katsuki was stunned. Is this lady, what was it called again? Oil lamping? Oil lighting? Whatever. She's trying to trick me. Well, flick that. As Katsuki opened his mouth to deliver a response so logical, so utterly convincing that the detective would have no way to say he was wrong, Inko said something. All right, detective, I think that will be all. Really? Interrogating a couple of children? I think we've done quite enough for today. Let's go, Mitsuki. Inko scooped up her son, blanket and all, and carried him out the door. Mitsuki followed while ushering Katsuki. He dropped his blanket though because blankets are for babies, duh. The rest of the day passed in a blur, and soon Katsuki was lying in his bed, staring at the open door. The lights were all kept on. It'll be okay, honey. He's still young, I'm sure this memory will fade as time goes on. Yeah, I sure hope so. Mitsuki said back to her husband. After a silence, she kept talking. Do you really think that sweet little Izuku could have had anything to do with it? His silence spoke volumes. Katsuki closed his eyes and wished for morning to come already. Downtown, in another apartment with a boarded-up window, lay a boy who dreamed sweet dreams. As he lay, his uncle watched from the corner, ever vigilant. All Might was dead. Or at least that was the idea, but when Yagi Tashinori awoke from a series of intensive surgeries weeks after his fated fight with his nemesis, he could do little but watch the live news play on his hospital room's television. Instead of the rioting or general panic he expected to see from the public as they mourned the loss of their hero, there was only quiet. Baffled, Yagi continued to watch in mounting horror as he realized that the symbol of peace might have not been as important as he thought, that he himself might not be as important as he thought, a realization that was broken when the screen suddenly panned to a muscular hero, standing atop a fallen villain with 2 massive bull horns, flashing a brilliant smile. I am here, the imposter announced. All Might began to cough up blood in shock. When Sir Night Eye heard the news of his mentor's return to consciousness, he rushed to the hospital immediately. He had seen the All Might imposter parading around town, and had immediately known it wasn't the real deal. For one, the imposter had one more wrinkle over his left eyebrow than usual. Whoever was behind that abomination was clearly not a true All Might fan. While his first instinct was to catch the false hero, upon further inspection that proved to be a difficult endeavor. For one, it seemed to have just as much strength and invulnerability as the original. The years Night Eye had spent as All Might's sidekick had shown him just how much power was needed to break through those defenses. The only people with a chance to take out All Wrong alone were either missing organs or 6 feet under. Night Eye rushed into the hospital corridor, searching frantically for room that proved to be a futile effort. However, as he soon came face to face with the gaunt face of Yagi Tashinori, stumbling down the hall with several nurses fussing over him, trying to convince him to get back into bed. Yagi, why are you out of bed? You're missing 5 organs, which is 4 more than I'd feel comfortable with right now. Night Eye admonished the sickly man. The world needs me. I would not be a true hero if I were to abandon the citizens of Japan when they need me most. All Might's words would be comforting if they weren't coming from a man who just lost 15 pounds overnight and not by exercising either. Oh my stars and stripes, the people of Japan are doing just fine. You're the one in danger. Night Eye snapped back. But what about the imposter? The people think I'm still out there saving the day. Yes. All wrong. Oh, that's what I've taken to calling your little knockoff will be just fine for another day or 2. He hasn't shown himself to be a threat to civilians, so for now we have the time to make a proper game plan to deal with him. Night Eye poked All Might's stomach, provoking a flinch. Night Eye decided in that moment to avoid eye contact with his hero. The last thing he wanted was to see All Might die some horrible death. Not only would that be traumatizing to see, but it could also potentially ruin any trust he had built up with his mentor over the years. Which means that you need to be in your best form for any plan I come up with to work. All Might deflated, literally leaving only Yagi Toshinori behind. His eyes looked far gaunter and more sunken than ever before. Night Eye of all people would know, and it was clear that time was catching up to him. You know best, sir. I can always trust you to get me back on the right track. After a bit of thinking, Yagi delivered his ultimatum. I'll rest for 3 days longer, but no more. I really do need to bring back the symbol of peace. No, all wrong will cut it. Night Eye huffed at Yagi's stubbornness, but simply looped the taller man's arm over his shoulder. They walked back to Yagi's hospital room, the symbol of peace shifting his weight onto his closest friend in the world. If a stranger were to observe this scene, they wouldn't see a hero and his sidekick, only two equals, relying on each other for support. What do we know about all wrong so far? Yagi asked his assembled table of allies. Across the table from him sat the three figures: Sasaki Mirai, Hike. Sir Night Eye, master tactician with the quirk of future vision. David Shield, the world's most prominent and brilliant support item engineer. Lastly, all the way from the United States was Kathleen Bates, aka Star and Stripe, an absolute powerhouse fighter capable of manipulating reality itself. Sir had decided that putting together a team of Japanese heroes could result in a press leak about All Wrong's identity. If that fact were to be made public, then the terror that All Might had anticipated upon his first waking might soon become a reality. So instead, he had picked the other two based on their connections to Yagi. Additionally, neither David nor Kathleen would consider selling out to the media of a country they didn't even live in. A foolproof plan, and certainly one that had nothing to do with an internet user named Sir Sasaki 1281's fanfiction written about the very situation. David was the one to provide Yagi with an answer to his question. We can assume that this entity is an experiment produced by All for One before his recent death. Strength-wise, my testing indicates that All Wrong has strength equal to, if not greater than, you at peak performance. He also hasn't shown any signs of fatigue, considering that he's been fighting crime 24/7 since his appearance without a single break. As far as intellect goes, he seems to be on par with you, Yagi. What do you mean, on par with me? All he does is say, I am here, and grin like an idiot. Is nobody else seeing that? Yagi asked the table. I mean, that's all that counts, right? Kathleen asked hesitantly. You guys, I'm not just some muscle brain who only has one line. I can do smart stuff too. Yagi pouted. Says the guy who asked me to make him an, and I quote, indestructible suit of armor that looks super cool and can use like 20 quirks at once. David rebutted. The heroes and engineer bickered back and forth a while longer, until the voice of reason finally broke them up. Since nobody else seems to be participating in this little group project, I've come up with a game plan. Ooh, what's the plan? Kathleen asked, leaning half across the table to Sasaki. Yes, I'd love to hear your insight, Mirai. David said, wiping Yagi's coughed-up blood from his forehead. Maybe calling All Might Uncle Sam's knockoff Superman poser was too far. Yes, Sasaki. I would love to hear your insight. Yagi said, shooting David one last glare. All right then. Sir Night Eye started. The first thing we're going to need is 2 tons of support item grade nanotubes. Well, this is the spot. All Might said to Star and Stripe. He was puffed up into a muscular form once more, but his physical therapy report showed that he could only hold it for about 4 hours, max less if he took any serious punches. To prevent any confusion during the fight, he was dressed in a leftover cosplay from Yagi's last trip in disguise to Comic-Con, the costume of a vigilante by the name of Knuckleduster. Yup, looks good to me. Star called back. They were positioned by a deserted beach a few miles off Yokohama, which was All Wrong's last public sighting. You got the cameras ready? We're all good on my end. All Might replied. A dozen yards from Star, he had set up a news anchor's large camera, acquired through Sir's connections. It was all ready to start broadcasting live on several local Yokohama news stations the moment Yagi flipped the on switch. The effects of gravity affecting Kathleen Bates' person will be stored as potential energy, Star and Stripe said, fulfilling the conditions for her Quirk, New Order. With a leap, the hero began to rise into the air, up towards the thick layer of clouds that lay over the waterfront. She continued rising until she had become far out of frame for the recording equipment. Then she made her second order. All of the air in a 12 million cubic foot space below me will warp both light and sound waves to make the appearance of Godzilla, as it appears in the 2014 film, and proceed to behave as such. Kathleen ranted, then took a moment to catch her breath. Geez, Knighted, leave a gal some room to breathe, would ya? The air below Star began to shimmer, and out of the water rose a massive creature, who stood at least 350 feet tall. All Might flipped the switch to record. Here we see a gigantic monster has appeared at a local beach in Yokohama Prefecture. All Might said behind the camera, using his best news anchor impression. All residents are advised to evacuate until a hero strong enough to take on such an impressive villain appears on the scene. The residents had already been evacuated by Sir Night-Eye the day before the operation, of course. Still, the sight of a gigantic monster, roaring and tearing up the beach waves as it writhed around would be enough cause for panic for any hero who wasn't aware of that fact. Which is why, 4.5 minutes later, All Wrong showed up just on Sir's schedule. All Might crushed the camera in one hand to end the livestream. You know, maybe David has a point about that muscle brain stuff. I could have just switched it off. Cease your deceptive machinations at once, imposter. For I am the true All Might. He yelled as he pointed heroically at All Wrong. I am here, was All Wrong's only response. The figure clad in red and blue leapt up to the kaiju and attempted to deliver a Delaware smash right into its noggin, only to phase right through it as if the monster was made of air. Phase 1 is complete. Target is in sight. Night-Eye said to All Might and Star, through their in-ear monitors. Star, proceed with Phase 2. That's right, bucko. We tricked you. And now it's time for you to disappear so the real All Might can get his job back. Star said from the air, as she raised a hand, causing the Godzilla illusion to break, thousands of shards of light dissolving as if a shattered pane of glass. All Might will cease to move from the space he stands for 10 seconds. Both muscular men on the beach froze, unable to move a single inch. Dang it, it affects both of Star said into her earpiece. I guess the bugger really does consider himself to be All Might. That's fine, Star. It'll make the plan more difficult though, if you can't use orders that cause direct harm without hurting All Might as well. Night-Eye replied. Such was the condition for New Order. Star needed to know her target's full name that they most identified with before she could impose any orders on them. In addition, she couldn't exceed a certain amount of physical force, not directly anyway. This meant that restraining two beings as strong as All Might could only be done for a few seconds before the order was stripped. Here! The imposter yelled as he broke free. Taking one step forward, then two, All Wrong began to run towards the real All Might. Sand sprayed in all directions as the two collided, hands gripping each other as they wrestled. Is that really how I sound? All Might asked his earpiece. Please focus on the villain ahead of you. Night-Eye responded. And yes. Well, lethality isn't my only trick. Star yelled from far in the air. She seemed to be continuously rising, gaining altitude as she gave orders from above. All Might will now lose consciousness. The hero and his doppelganger slumped to the sand in unison. I think that worked. Sir David, are you ready for the drop? Star asked, tapping her earpiece. Not yet. All Wrong appears to be recovering somehow. David responded. Is it possible that it is immune to mind-based attacks too? Sure enough, the slumped form in spandex twitched, and slowly rose to its feet. The entire time though, his head remained slumped to the side, eyes closed and mouth open to drool, much like his clone still lying in the sand. Ah, dang it all to Hooters. Star cursed. It's almost like this thing's been programmed to fight non-stop. In Mustafa, a certain boy in a certain preschool sneezed. Fine then, consider that order revoked. Star hastily yelled, but it was too late to quell the damage done entirely. All Wrong set loose a full power punch at his foe lying in the sand. No! Star screamed from in the air. When the dust cleared, All Might was standing, but only barely. All Wrong seemed baffled by this turn of events, if his unchanged grin was anything to go by. All Might spit a mouthful of blood and phlegm onto the sand. Worry not, young Bates. For I shall prevail against all foes. Hey, don't call me that. It makes me feel old when I realize my childhood hero is in his 60s. Star said back. At this point she was much too high in the clouds to hear him, so they had to rely on their comms units. Hey Dunderhead Shield. If there was ever a time to drop it'd be now, we're struggling, down here. That's my signal to book it. All Might said as he sped away from the confused clone. If All Wrong was momentarily confused before at the sight of a villain taking on one of his full power punches and getting back up, he must have been absolutely baffled to see a military-grade freight helicopter descending from the cloud cover. Barely visible from the ground, Sir Night-Eye stood in the aircraft's open door, gripping some sort of black metal cable, hand just yards from the end of the wire dangling outside. I feel sorry for the taxpayers who are covering this whole ordeal, he said over the comms, just before he leapt out of the door, cable in hand. I've got you, Star said from her position in the air just under the falling man, and out of the air grabbed not Night-Eye, but the end of the black wire. Kathleen Bates will ignore Newton's third law of motion for 15 seconds. Star fell from the air, gravity nullification abandoned for this new order. As she fell, she picked up speed much faster than she should have, quickly passing by the still falling Night-Eye. The built-up potential energy gained by such a rise into the air now bore down on her as she overcame terminal velocity. A crack sounded in the air as the hero zoomed towards the ground, her free hand outstretched into a fist. That boom was soon followed by an even louder one as she crashed into the beach, sand melting to glass immediately upon impact. Underneath her fist was the torn costume of a mildly bruised All Wrong. Star, who by any right should have been grievously wounded by a fall from that speed, had not a scratch on her. By removing the third law's effect on herself, she could momentarily throw any punch without equivalent consequences. The cable now buried in the crystalline crater of glass pulled taut suddenly, and a whirring noise followed as Sir Night-Eye slid down the makeshift zipline. With his limber legs, Night-Eye delivered a strong kick to his fallen foe as he landed on the ground, dealing absolutely no damage to the juggernaut. Quick, All Might, grab him while he's stunned. Back on the scene, All Might grabbed his clone, lifted him, spinning him around in his hands as he did. The clone spun faster and faster, the cable wrapping him ever tighter as the helicopter slowly lowered to the ground. By the time David landed the helicopter and disembarked from the cockpit, All Wrong was completely contained in a donut of cable 4 yards in radius. While he seemed to struggle, the cable didn't give way even a single inch. No use trying to break out, David said as he approached. That fiber is a nanomaterial I just spent the last 5 days and billions of yen developing. Phase 3 is complete. Good work everyone, Night-Eye said to the gathered group. Not a single hero walked away from the battle with significant injuries. Except for All Might, but that was just par for the course. Now Star? If you would do the honors. I'd love to, thanks, she said as she put her hands on Sasaki's shoulders. Sasaki Mirai's quirk will now function reversed, in regard to time. With that, Night-Eye looked All Wrong directly in his soulless eyes, the physical contact condition of his quirk fulfilled by his earlier kick, and furrowed his brow at what he saw. Then he began to laugh. Starting as a chuckle, then migrating to full-blown guffawing, Night-Eye laughed at whatever truths he saw in All Wrong's past. What did you see? Is it all for one? Did he plant this copy as some kind of plan to take over the world after his death? All Might demanded. A toy. Night-Eye managed through his teary eyes. We've been fighting a toy. I'm clearly missing something cause, toys, don't take one of my Tokyo smash attacks and live to tell the tale. You're gonna need to explain. Star said crossly, arms folded. With that, Night Eye regained some composure and stood up. All wrong isn't related to all for one, never has been. He paused as he let that sink into the group. They were so concerned with stopping a single supervillain's schemes that they never once paused to think that this clone may have had some other, unrelated source. It's just the product of some kid's quirk manifestation. It looks like he was crying over All Might's supposed death when his action figure transformed into a real-life All Might. Lucky kid, Sasaki thought to himself. So, what you're saying is that this villain is just a quirk accident? David asked. I'm saying that All Wrong isn't a villain at all. In fact, he's been faithfully following his wielder's command to be a hero all this time. Just think, when did All Wrong ever cause harm to a civilian? Night Eye was answered only with silence. In fact, this whole situation is preposterous when you think about it. We have a perfect hero patrolling Japan unrestingly 24/7, and we want to what? Stop him? Throw him in Tartarus? Night Eye continued. But my job. All Might protested. My identity. All Might, let's be real. You're missing half your organs. Plus, you've been telling me how it was always your dream to get a license and teach at UA. Night Eye outstretched an arm to the bound figure, his head barely peeking out over the gigantic bundle of wire. This is your golden opportunity. Let this sentient quirk do the work for you, and you can finally get the chance to retire. Aye. I suppose you have a point, Mirai. All Might said, indignation draining out of his expression. I'm glad you came to your senses. Sasaki said, smugly. Okay, not that this little heart-to-heart you have going on isn't adorable, but what's the plan for Grinny MC? Muscle face over there? Star piped up, pointing over her shoulder to the exposed head of All Wrong. Cable disconnected from the helicopter, David lifted the aircraft into the air. I'm blowing this popsicle stand, see you all at the Hero Gala. He has said once the heroes began discussing the logistics of unleashing a ball of unbridled kinetic energy from its containment. Okay, big guy, I'm really sorry for punching you and all, but I'm gonna need you to be really calm and not kill us all when I take these cables off, okay? Star and Stripe asked the bound figure. I am here. Oh, phew, she said, wiping sweat from her brow. Well, since you promised. Carbon nanotubes within 100 feet of me will dissolve. W8 Star, let's discuss this first. All Might called, unheard by Star. Into their atomic components. Star finished. The cords binding All Wrong began to dissolve, leaving only a tar-like substance covering his body. Now freed, he sent a glare in All Might's direction, who raised his arms into a fighting stance. Then turning to Star, all colors seemed to drain from the copy's face. I am here. All Wrong called, and promptly ran away at full speed, never once looking back. From that day forward, All Might was dead, and a new number 1 hero had risen. It had been 10 years since the incident at the museum, and Katsuki still treated Izuku like some kind of monster. In no time at all, Katsuki had made himself king of the school, and gathered a gang of extras, who would follow him around and even obey his every order. And when his goons overheard him calling Izuku a freak, there was nothing to stop their empowerment towards making Izuku's life as miserable as possible. What had started as a simple avoidance had soon turned into whispered rumors, then name-calling. When Izuku applied to the same local middle school as Katsuki, Aldra Junior High, the bullying picked up steam. Still, no matter what methods they used, be that shoving Izuku around, stealing his things, or calling him names, he remained as cheerful as ever. His perpetual smile was almost unnatural, as any human should have broken under years of such treatment. A third year already, Izuku was now preparing for his move from Aldra Junior High to his dream high school. A little birdie told me you the freak decided to apply to UA. Tsubasa crowed, walking into the empty classroom Izuku had chosen to sit in while watching the sunset. Tsubasa was followed by Katsuki's other crony, and Bakugo was taking the rear of his little group. Peace. Little villain is what he is. Katsuki scoffed. If he thinks that writing in that darn notebook of his makes him better than me, he's delusional. Come on, Kaken, I know you're going to be the number 1 hero. Izuku responded innocently. And besides, This book isn't just for becoming a hero, it's so that I can remember stuff about all my different friends. Izuku closed his notebook and held it up as if to demonstrate. Gimme that. Katsuki's other crony named Tasaki said. Tasaki stretched his long fingers across the 5-foot gap between him and Izuku, snatching the notebook away. Almost imperceptibly, Katsuki winced slightly at each creak and pop made by the fingers. Wait, give that back. Izuku yelled, making a futile grab at the book now held far above his head. It could be dangerous. Like a little book could hurt us. Tasaki jeered, and like a human crane, swung his arm and the book clutched in his grasp over to Bakugo. Take a little look-see, boss. Is there anything spooky in there? A drop of sweat running down his brow, but unable to make a fool of himself in front of his watching goons, Katsuki took hold of the notebook. Drop it, Kaken. Please. Izuku pleaded as Tsubasa stretched out his wings, leaving no room to pass him. Katsuki quickly flipped through several pages of sketches and descriptions of various entities, stopping suddenly on a page done in color. The title was Painting of the Ocean, and had few notes besides one pointing out that the drawing was only a copy, not the original. Following the note, most of the page was taken up by a watercolor painting in blue. The painting was plain, simply depicting a dark blue underwater scene, with rays of sunlight shining down through the sea. It's just stupid paintings of water and stuff. Katsuki scoffed, slamming the book closed once more and offering it to the waiting Tsubasa. Ah, does the little creep want to be an artist? Tsubasa asked in a sickly sweet tone. Then maybe you can take a painting of this beautiful flying book? With that nonsensical joke, Tsubasa tossed the notebook through the open window. Izuku ran to it and leaned out the window to see his notebook laying several stories below him, soaking in the koi pond below. You know, you should really grab your book before it gets ruined. Tasaki suggested. I've heard that water and paper don't mix. If you want a quick way to get down, I'd suggest taking a swan dive out the window. Tsubasa joined in. To Katsuki Bakugo, being the best meant rising above the rest. And rising above meant ignoring the weak. So though he may have thought that suicide baiting was going too far, he said nothing in his childhood friend's defense. Instead, Katsuki turned away from the small boy and said, "You're never going to be a hero, okay? So give it up unless you want me to beat it into you." On that note, the boy turned and began to leave the classroom, cronies in tow. As he left, Katsuki coughed slightly, then spit on the floor. If inspected closely, one might realize that it smelled faintly of seawater. Izuku walked home sadly. Not only had his notebook been soaked through, but Kaken had called him a villain again. Tsubasa and Tasaki could say what they wanted, but he had known Kaken forever. There might be a speck of truth in what he said. Izuku passed under a bridge, shivering at the change in temperature the shade brought. "Hey kid, sit still so I can take over your body." A scratchy voice yelled out from behind the boy. Turning, Izuku's first thought was that he had accidentally summoned a friend again. But the mass of sludge following him, complete with eyes and teeth, did not seem friendly in the slightest. The look in its eyes convinced Izuku that this slime entity was not about to negotiate on that fact. The sludge leapt for Izuku, absorbing Izuku into its mass in an instant. "Gotta be fast, so I can take over your body before you get a chance to fight back," the villain exclaimed, moving towards the boy's face. Izuku held his hands over his mouth and nose to keep the monster on the outside of his body. "Thanks." Izuku felt something get summoned but couldn't see what it was. His eyes were already covered by the slime being, as it attempted to force his way past the boy's hands. Thump, 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 thump. The noise began slow, like a pendulum swinging, slowly getting faster and faster. "New!" the villain screeched. "Do you have any idea what you've just unleashed on the world? Sludge this, I'm out of here." With a sking noise, Izuku's vision returned as the sludge over his eyes slid away, reforming into a single mass. Fearfully, the slime tried to slip down the nearby sewer grate. An attempt thwarted by a large black object slamming directly into the villain, leaving nothing but a green splatter across the underpass. The squished remains of an eyeball could be seen stuck to the wall. The thumping object appeared to be a black rubber ball, the size of a melon. The ball bounced continuously around the bridge's underside, somehow gaining speed with every bounce, rather than slowing. "Thanks, friend. You can go in," Izuku tried, but the ball whizzed right by Izuku's ear, so he ducked out of the fast-moving object's way. "If I don't have a moment to breathe, I can't unsummon the ball. This has never happened before, what do I do?" Izuku thought to himself frantically, as the thumping noise around him transformed into a continuous hum. The ball was now moving so fast it appeared to be in multiple places at once. "How do I stop this thing?" Maybe the sludge was right. Thankfully, a passerby appeared just in time to help. "Regular citizen Smosh." A voice familiar to Izuku called out, and he looked up to see a skinny, downright shrink-wrapped blonde man throwing his fist out into the buzzing air of the underpass. By some miracle, the stranger managed to connect with the ball. For a single moment that felt like an eternity, fist and rubber met. Then, like a bomb had gone off, a resounding bang sounded, and the ball went flying into the sky. The object soared away, parting the clouds as it flew through the stratosphere. "Are you all right, young man?" the stranger asked, now kneeling beside the shocked teen, and held out a large hand to lift Izuku up. Izuku had been having quite a day. First it was Kakin and his bullies, then getting attacked by some mugger made of slime. Finally, his own Quirk had practically gone haywire, and now he was getting offered help from a strange man who looked like a blonde human stick bug. "Yes. I think so?" Izuku responded weakly. "Thanks for the assist, mister," he said, accepting the man's offered hand and pulling himself to his feet. Yagi Tashinori," the stranger declared. "What was that thing anyways, some kind of rocket?" "It was a rubber ball actually." At the sight of Yagi's confused expression, Izuku rushed to clarify. "It's my Quirk. I summoned it and it just kept bouncing." That thing was a child's Quirk? All Might thought to himself, discreetly massaging his now bruised knuckles. It felt like one of Star's Tokyo smashes. "A fine Quirk," Yagi declared. "Say, you ever think of becoming a hero? A Quirk that strong could be invaluable in the business." Izuku gaped at the man in shock. 14 years of being called creepy or useless, and after one interaction a total stranger calls him hero material. It almost seemed too good to be true. Does he really mean that though? Izuku pondered. "Do I mean what, young man?" Yagi asked, confused. "Oops. I was mumbling again, wasn't I?" Izuku thought in his head this time. Izuku grabbed his pant legs and gripped them tightly, staring at the floor. After a moment, he seemed to gather his courage and looked up at the man across from him. "Do you really think that I can be a hero with a Quirk as scary as mine?" Izuku demanded. Yagi paused and looked thoughtfully towards the sky, staring at the patch of sky now devoid of clouds. "Hero work isn't just about the power, kid. It's about the heart." Yagi looked around and leaned in to whisper to the teen. "You can keep a secret, right?" "Sure." Izuku shrugged, proving that time didn't mend his inability to recognize stranger danger. The old man lifted the edge of his shirt, revealing a massive scar. The wound spanned over a foot in radius, originating from a spot just below the ribcage. Gnarled flesh and surgical wounds knitted themselves together to form a mass of scarred skin barely recognizable as human. In other words, an average Tuesday evening for Izuku. "I actually used to be a hero. Then I got this wound and had to retire soon after." Yagi explained. "My point being, hero work is dangerous. No matter how strong your Quirk, every time you put on that costume you will be risking your life. So, more important than power, yes, much more, is heart." Yagi punctuated this point by poking the boy's chest with his finger. A tear fell from Izuku's eye. Then two, until the boy was sobbing. Yagi patted his shoulder reassuringly as the boy wept. There, my boy. All will be well. It just, other than my mom, you're the first person to ever say that to me." Izuku choked out, wiping his wet face with his sleeve. "That can't be right." All Might thought. "A Quirk that summons ball of kinetic energy strong enough to hurt me and nobody once told him he could be a hero? Thank you." Izuku stuttered out, tears coming to a halt. Is there anything I can do to pay you back for everything, mister? Not unless you've got a spare handful of organs. Yagi joked. I do have some of those I could summon. Izuku contemplated the idea a bit, before settling on something better. Alright, I know what'll help. Just close your eyes. Izuku proposed. Confused, but willing to humor the boy, lest he cry anymore, Yagi closed his eyes. What's that clicking sound? He thought to himself as his eyes shut. No sooner had he done so, a chair of some sort rose up from beneath Yagi's feet. The man's eyes snapped open to find himself reclining in an antique dentist or barber's chair. Stranger still were the metal cuffs attached to the arm and footrests. The guards snapped shut with a metallic sound. It really would be best for you to close your eyes, Yagi-san. Izuku said to the man. It always helps me whenever I get shots. What is the meaning of this? Yagi demanded, struggling to no avail to extricate himself from the chair. The metallic cylinder the chair rested upon opened, and a metal arm reached out and up to the frantic man. The arm's end was sharp, a long needle that looked almost like... Oh no! When the kid said shots, he wasn't kidding. The needle rammed its way into Yagi's neck and injected him with some sort of thin liquid. Izuku said, holding his hand over his mouth and looking greener than usual. I can deal with anything else, but not shots. They gross me out. Yagi tried to demand answers out of the kid but found that his mouth had become difficult to move. Looks like the anesthesia is kicking in. I've got to get going, mister, but I hope the operation goes well. Izuku yelled as he grabbed his bag and ran off out of the underpass, apparently too queasy to stick around any longer. Operation? What operation? More metal arms extended from the cylinder, with a number of attachments, from saws and scalpels to tiny liquid suction tubes. The largest set of saws began to work its way through Yagi's shirt, cutting the fabric until the entirety of his scar was exposed. Is this thing some kind of back alley surgery chair? Yagi thought as he struggled once more against his bonds. I've got to get out of here. Still, the cuffs held tight. It didn't help Yagi's situation that his arms were completely limp from the injection. The scalpel reached the man's exposed skin and began to make an incision. Seared with pain, Yagi couldn't even scream. Isn't there supposed to be anesthesia? The kid said something about that before he left. Following that thought, Yagi remembered a lecture he once received from Recovery Girl, after he required surgery to remove a shard of shrapnel while studying at UA. Really, boy, I had to use the office's whole year's supply of anesthesia just to keep you under for an hour. That ridiculous quirk of yours and its toxin invulnerability. I swear, quirks these days are getting wilder and wilder. That must make whatever was in that syringe the good stuff. Not good enough to knock me out completely, though. Yagi internally screamed as the scalpel finished its cut and a second arm reached for the wound to insert a large tube of some sort. The pain grew worse as the tube started to pump liquid into Yagi's open wound. Seconds later, the searing grew agonizing as he felt the liquid melt away his insides, a process completed by a second tube's insertion and subsequent suction of his liquefied flesh through it. All Might could only watch in horror as he watched the remnants of his organs travel through the clear tube and down into the depths of the chair. Is this how I die? The retired hero thought to himself grimly. Organs stolen by some random kid's magic chair under a bridge? I guess my mom got it right. All Might snapped out of his daze by a third tube's entrance into his chest cavity. This tube was churning out a strange liquid as well, but it felt thicker than the rest. The third liquid burned far, far worse than the others, and although Yagi couldn't work his vocal cords, his mouth opened in a silent scream of terror. The surgery continued for hours after this. While Yagi was only dimly aware of any events that came afterwards, he recalled images of his organs being rebuilt beneath his very eyes, catching occasional glimpse of a long missing lung and liver underneath the many prodding scopes and whizzing saws. Finally, far past the point Yagi felt as if he could bear the torture no longer, the arms finished sewing the man's shirt back together and retracted. The 4 cuffs released with a hydraulic hiss, and the man was free. Wasting no time at all, Yagi sped away from the demon-possessed chair as fast as he could. Though his limbs may fail underneath him, and his pure delirium and panic left his sense of reason long in the past, the man would stop at nothing to escape those deadly cuffs, should they decide to call him back for a checkup. After over 24 hours of holding himself up at home, hiding away under a pile of blankets in the pitch dark of his bedroom, Yagi finally checked his abdomen as a damage report. What he found was not the grizzled mass of scars he had become accustomed to over the past decade, but only a single pink incision line, evidence of what he had hoped was a horrible nightmare. Deep in the vaults of the SCP Foundation was a painting. This painting was covered by a large cloth and locked in a storage container. The painting appeared to be made from the perspective of a character underwater. It was mesmerizing, the way the rays of light from the surface seemed to reach through the frame. The painting's blue, calming veneer was merely a facade, however. Not even the Foundation knew the secrets held in those strokes of oil paint. Stephen Yearling was an artist. They all were really. All 5 of them. The 5 artists in question were students at Redacted University. None of them possessed much talent, but each was gifted in their own right. Their brush strokes may not have been the most elegant, but each of them understood deeply the heart that went into making art. The soul. They met at an art convention. Stephen was selling sketches. The other 4 were quick to gather around, offering encouragement and praise. Soon the talk shifted to each of the artists' love for the craft. They all hit it off instantly. The 5 worked together for months afterwards. They shared a space in the dorm studios, a wonderland of hanging white tarps covered in a myriad of splattered colors, and paintings of every subject imaginable from mountaintops to eggs on toast. A large, empty canvas sat front and center. Stephen planned to use the space for his greatest work yet his magnum opus. Stuck on the subject for weeks, Stephen sketched idea upon idea and threw out each and every one. He needed his masterpiece to be alive. To feel like you could breathe in the scene, or suffocate inside. So, when an opportunity arose for a group of 5 students to visit the country of Redacted, he leapt at the opportunity. If inspiration was Stephen's goal, then this trip might be the road to bring him there. His 4 friends enthusiastically agreed. The trip to Redacted was uneventful, a long plane ride across the ocean. Still, Stephen felt a nervousness like he had never felt while in the air. Would he find the answers he sought? Or would he be left grasping at straws? Thankfully he had his friends to comfort him. Living in Redacted was a wonderful experience, truly all sunshine and daisies. Until it wasn't. But that's how these things always go, isn't it? Peaceful times come and go, like the shifting of the ocean waves. Grab on tight. A voice screamed through the howling winds. As time went on in his temporary new home, Stephen noticed changes. Upheavals. First it was the police. More officers seemed to surge into the quaint town every day. Then it was the gossip. Rumors spread like wildfire of political upheaval and instability. Still, Stephen focused on the peaceful life he now led. It's just politics. He thought to himself. All will pass. An orange figure was tossed in the waves. The life-saving device held the body above the waves, but that simply wasn't enough to stop the relentless sea. The government was overthrown. Guns fired in the streets. As chanting and screaming could be heard outside, a certain dark room occupied by a group of students was consumed with a quiet resolve to escape. Stephen! Where's Stephen? A frantic voice called. The wind was its only answer. The 5 students ran to the beach. Their entire life's savings were caught up in this opportunity for freedom. They expected to see a boat but were met only by a dingy raft. Gunfire sounded behind them. The group looked each other in the eyes and made the silent decision to get aboard anyways. 3 blots of orange stained the dark, calm sea. The raft drifted across the sea. There were only 4 life vests aboard, and Stephen drew the short straw. We're all in this together. One student declared, paddling a little faster, with more urgency. Dark clouds were on the horizon. The storm came out of nowhere. 1 second the air was clear, and the next the wind began to blow, and thick, heavy drops of rain tore through the air. The 5 huddled together, lightning as their only means to see in the oppressive darkness. The waves tossed the raft to and fro, until all of a sudden, the raft split. The 5 were dumped into an unforgivingly rough sea. The 4 held afloat by vests thought themselves lucky, but Steven suffered the least among them. The vests held their victims above the water, waves crashing into their faces as they dipped under the wake again and again. Their drowning was a slow and painful one. Steven sunk down. Further and further, he sank, until all visible light had disappeared and the only feeling remaining was cold. As if by miracle, rays of sunshine seemed to shine down on Steven. They glittered and danced through the waves, casting beautiful reflections down of the sky above. Beautiful. The student, the sun, the artist thought, as he breathed his last. When Steven Yearling's belongings were collected, a total of 1,392 works were found. These works ranged from simple sketches to vast sculptures. Among them, front and center, was a simple painting. This painting was the most alluring and lifelike of all, depicting only blue. The back of the painting was signed with 5 names, and among them was one in bold. Steven Yearling. Drown them. The painting seemed to whisper. Drown them all. Show them that wonderful light. My masterpiece. Katsuki couldn't breathe, and Izuku was responsible somehow. Ever since he left school and started walking home, Katsuki kept coughing. The itchy feeling in his lungs grew wet, and the boy began to feel dizzy as he stumbled down the road home. Katsuki collapsed in the middle of a crowded street. The throngs of feet didn't stop to help, they only parted way for the boy, as he coughed harder, desperately clutching his chest and heaving bile. I'm sure a hero will help him. They whispered as they turned their eyes away. Help! Katsuki tried to scream, but he couldn't form the words. Whether because of his lungs' self-destruction or his inability to ever ask for help, even Katsuki himself did not know. So, he began to fire off explosions. The hospital was too far away to make it on foot, and he wouldn't be able to call an ambulance in his state. If no heroes would notice him, Katsuki just had to make them notice. Katsuki spit up another mouthful of seawater, as the wooden sign for a nearby cafe went up in flames. The crowd around Katsuki screamed and began to stampede away. Halt, villain! A muscular hero, with strange caution tape-covered wrist guards announced. Finally, someone who could help. The hero bounded towards the cause of the flames and threw a punch into the kneeling boy's ribs. Katsuki went flying into a brick wall. Sparks flew. The wall was seared with ash, an imprint the size of a teenager. Another hero appeared. This one had a face made of wood. He sent out long, branching limbs to ensnare the hapless victim. Stop resisting arrest and come quietly, the hero said. Crackling fireworks rippled their way across Katsuki's skin in response. His face was covered in vegetation. A trickle of seawater slipped through the thicket. He's resisting arrest, just knock him out, the first hero declared. The muscular hero approached the boy. Hey kid, stay back, it isn't safe. A police officer guarding the police line yelled. Katsuki might not have been able to see, but the voice he heard next was one he could never forget. It consumed his mind every night, the narrator of his nightmares. Steven, cut it out. Izuku yelled as he began tearing the brambles from his friend's face. You're interfering with an arrest, kid. The hero Death Arms admonished, as he pulled Izuku off Katsuki. When Izuku turned to the angry heroes, Katsuki froze in terror. The boy hailed as a walking ray of sunshine was dripping such a menacing aura and scowling at the heroes with such an intensity that all time seemed to stop. Nobody could move, every bystander frozen in terror at the small child's rage. Arrest? Arrest, the boy demanded, breaking the silence. He's drowning, for God's sake. He's destroying the street, Kamui Woods managed. Still, his grip on Katsuki loosed slightly. Call an ambulance, Izuku said, suddenly calm yet no less dangerous seeming. Now. How about we take him down to the police station first, then see about the ambulance? Death Arms suggested. Izuku turned back to the hero again, furious once more. But Katsuki never heard his response, as he collapsed with a final trickle of water from his lips. Whatever the other boy said in his defense must have worked, however, because the sound of sirens could be heard through the unconscious haze Katsuki now waded through. Katsuki awoke at a hospital. He instinctively began to cough, but this time no liquid was to be found. Opening his eyes, he saw Izuku at the foot of his bed. The smaller boy smiled, seeing his friend wake from his comatose state. "Get away from me, you monster." Izuku's smile vanished. Katsuki curled up on his cot and covered his face with his sheets. He clutched his hands against himself with such vigor that his temples began to turn an angry red. The image of that dark, too long figure, and the feeling of coughing up a never-ending supply of salty water invaded his senses in the darkness. "I just want you to leave me alone." Minutes later, a nurse checking on the sleeping patient found Katsuki huddled under his sheets, sobbing to himself. Besides him, the room was empty. Incident Report 1300B12. Level 5 security clearance is required for examining this document. SCP involved: SCP-1300, SCP-8502. Personnel involved: Agents redacted, redacted, and redacted, 5D Class Agents, Yagi Tashinori. Date: XXXXXXXXXXXX. Location: Redacted, North Street, Redacted Natural History Museum, Redacted Junior High School. Description: At Redacted AM, XXXXXX, SCP-1300 disappeared from containment. This was the second instance of this item's disappearance in Foundation record. The cause of disappearance in both instances is assumed to be SCP-8502 under a high degree of evidence. Unlike previous cases of SCP-8502's interference, SCP-1300 was not returned to Foundation containment. A team of 5D class agents discovered SCP-1300 under a bridge, with SCP-8502 nowhere in sight. Once recovered and examined in Foundation laboratories, the DNA of one Yagi Tashinori, known to be the identity of the original figure, All Might, was found on the recovered anomaly. Samples included blood, hair, sweat, and urine. Addendum 1300B12-1. Following SCP-1300's discovery was the discovery of the remains of Foundation Agent Redacted nearby. Agent Redacted appeared to have been killed with extreme blunt force trauma. This marks the second failed attempt to secure SCP. Addendum 1300B12-2. List of attempts to secure SCP-8502. Agent Redacted failed to secure SCP-8502 on XXXXX at Redacted Natural History Museum. The agent in question was disfigured and killed by SCP. The agent had an ability derived from SCP-3396 which allowed him to disperse gas with a paralyzing agent. The lack of physical force made the ability viable in containing SCP-8502, but SCP-8502 retained the ability to summon SCP-783 to his aid even while asleep. Agent Redacted failed to secure SCP-8502 on XXXXX at SCP-8502's primary residence. This agent was killed immediately by SCP. The agent's SCP-3396 ability allowed her to exercise physical control over subjects, provided physical contact. However, SCP-783 was guarding SCP-8502's bedside even before the agent arrived. Thermal imaging indicates that SCP-8502 did not wake during the incident. Agent Redacted failed to secure SCP-8502 on XXXXX at Redacted, North Street. Agent was killed by blunt force trauma. Trauma was inflicted by SCP-018, which is still at large. The agent had an ability derived from SCP-3396 which allowed him to possess the body and abilities of any host he was fully contained in. This ability was deemed a possible solution for containment. However, it left Agent Redacted weak to physical attacks. Izuku never wanted to hurt Katsuki. Still he did. No amount of wishful thinking would change what had happened. The sight of his dearest friend's face, as it turned cold and blue, scared him much more than he thought it would. Izuku had seen many people die, but none scared him like the thought of losing Katsuki. Maybe he's right. Izuku thought, I'll never be a hero. I'm just a monster. Still, the boy wished to be a hero. On some level it felt like the desire was wrapped up in his very DNA, his soul even. Other times Izuku wondered if it was all to push down the guilty feeling he got when he saw what destruction he had wrought on those he loved merely by existing. No, Izuku declared to himself, then out loud. No! The other passengers on the subway sent the boy startled glances. His face flushed with embarrassment. I'm not going to let a few parts of my quirk control my life. I healed Yagi-san, didn't I? My quirk can be used to help people. Izuku lifted his head, no longer ashamed to exist. As he watched the busy streets of Japan pass him by, he found in himself a new resolve to become a hero, and to prove to the world that he was more than a monster. Whether for better or for worse remained to be seen. Can you hear me okay? A voice asked, coming through the speakers of Shoyuta Aizawa's laptop. He sat at his desk at home, already mentally calculating how many seconds of sleep he'd wasted on this idiotic conversation. Yes, you oaf. Aizawa snapped back. I can hear you just fine. Now are you ready to tell us why you've skipped 2 days of teaching, leaving me to take over all your classes? I was getting to that, you see, Yagi said nervously. Geez, Aizawa hadn't seen his coworker this nervous since he had told the teaching staff that wild story about his secret quirk and some boogeyman supervillain. Now. Sasaki Mirai admonished. Let's give him a chance to speak. It seems to me that something has Yagi spooked. The great and powerful All Might, shivering in his boots? I never thought I'd see the day. David Shield joked. David's face was layered on a photo of a potato and moving erratically across his box on Aizawa's screen. The potato was because the three were calling and using a pre-Quirk era software called Zoom. Yagi thought that it would be an efficient method for the meeting. Aizawa disagreed. Case in point, a floating potato was invading Aizawa's vision against his will. Despite being hailed as a tech genius, David somehow couldn't figure out how to remove the filter. Aizawa truly was surrounded by idiots. Ahem. Yagi said, clearing his throat. I've called this meeting to discuss the appearance of another possible Class 5 quirk, or worse. Instantly, the group's attention was all on Yagi. Class 5 quirks weren't exactly something to scoff about. Only 8 were known to exist worldwide. One for all, and its inverse all for one were 2, Star and Stripe's new order was a third. In other words, quirks weren't called Class 5, unless they had serious society or reality-altering capabilities. You're pulling our legs, right? David asked hesitantly. What do you mean by worse? What could possibly be worse than a new Class 5 quirk? Sasaki probed. Well, we could be dealing with a new all-for-one, or he could be alive and dealing his services to children. Yagi said. The call seemed to have been muted, from how quiet David and Sasaki were. And what, may I ask, makes you think the return of Japan's greatest supervillain could be a possibility, exactly? Aizawa asked, breaking the silence. Yagi was silent for a few moments before he answered. There was a kid. No, I hesitate to call him that after what he did, but yes, a child. I found him under a bridge and saved him from what he said was his quirk. It was some kind of ball of kinetic energy. When I punched it, it actually hurt me. I managed to send it flying, but only by using one for all at my maximum output. That sounds like a strong quirk. Night Eye exclaimed. I see why you think so, but that's not exactly Class 5 worthy, is it? I'm not finished, Sasaki. Yagi said darkly. He did something else. What did he do? David asked. Wait, did he hurt you? Is that why I couldn't reach you for the past few days? Because you were in the hospital? In surgery? Yagi flinched back visibly at the word. No, I was at home. I was too afraid to leave my house, if I'm being honest. Yagi, you idiot. What in the world happened to you? Spit it out already. Aizawa growled. Was that the proper victim treatment method he had been trained on as a hero? But this call was already eating into the precious few minutes a day the man could sleep, and he wasn't going to let Yagi ruin that for him. It was a chair. Yagi shivered visibly and looked behind his shoulder as if expecting to see a piece of furniture sneaking up on him. It was a horrible chair, full of needles and saws and tubes. It took out my organs and filled me with acid. The man declared with a dark finality. Your organs? Yagi, I thought we discussed this. I simply don't feel comfortable with you losing any more organs. What did this chair steal exactly? Show me the wounds. Sasaki yelled, standing up from his seat and slamming his desk, the sound rumbling through the speakers on the other's devices. Wordlessly, Yagi stood up and lifted his shirt, revealing a thin pink incision line running from the lower chest to his waist. David was the first to realize what was wrong with the picture. Dude, what happened to your scar? He exclaimed, that gigantic white Zetsu-looking thing. Gone, was his only reply. This child. He healed you then? Fixed your organ damage? Sasaki wondered. If he was behind this surgery chair and the ball of energy that would make his quirk an anomaly of sorts, I see why you'd assume All for One had something to do with it. No, you don't understand. That chair was no gift, it was straight out of a nightmare. Yagi wailed. It hurt, Sasaki, it really hurt. Yes, Sasaki said as he waved off his mentor's tears. Many medical quirks are quite painful. It's only because of your ridiculous constitution that you never had to deal with them, frankly. Yagi's mouth opened and closed, too astonished to form a sentence. He simply couldn't fathom how anyone could hear about the torture he went through and respond so callously. His oldest friend, no less. If that's all, can I go now? Aizawa asked. Not quite yet, Yagi, you need to give me the kid's name. I can't run a police scan on his quirk without that. Sasaki asked. He didn't give me a name. Yagi replied. He was a middle schooler though, he had curly green hair and eyes and, well, he looked like a ball of sunshine incarnate. Very polite kid all the way up to he locked me in that chair. Yagi trailed off, staring blankly to the empty wall beside him. It can't be. Sasaki thought. What's on your mind, Sasaki? David asked. It's just that, well, I know this sounds ridiculous, but that sounds exactly like the child I saw in All Wrongs Past. Sasaki supposed. Aizawa was lost. And ready for a nap. Whatever in All Wrong was, surely it could wait until tomorrow. Could that child have been the one to create All Wrong? We still never figured that out after all these years. David said. If the kid Yagi met is in middle school, the years do match up as do the children's quirks, summoning powerful objects. Yagi zoned back into the conversation, face paling immediately. You're saying that that kid was also behind my replacement? I'm saying it's a possibility. That's all. Sasaki answered. I'll run a search for powerful object summoning quirks and see what turns up. For now, all of us should be watching for a child matching his description so we can ask him some questions. Are we done here then? Aizawa drawled. Well, not exactly. There are procedures we need to discuss for if we find the child in question. Good. Aizawa said as he closed his laptop. What were the odds that Aizawa would randomly find that single kid out of the millions in Japan? Aizawa never made it to bed, falling unconscious the moment his head hit the desk. Izuku Midoriya stood in front of the gates to UA. Today was the day that would decide his entire high school career. Well, there was always Shiketsu, but still. Pushed along by the crowd, Izuku soon found himself beyond the walls and staring up at the main campus itself. This is my first step to becoming a hero. He thought to himself as he immediately tripped and plummeted towards the ground at Mach speeds. I'll catch you. A girl's voice yelled, but it was futile. Izuku's friends always had his back, after all. Turning in the air, Izuku caught a glimpse of a girl with round cheeks and short brown hair staring, startled, down the pit that had opened in the ground. With a rumbling noise, the ground closed over him and left no trace of the boy. Staring at the mound of dirt left behind, Uraraka decided that this would be a good time to find a trusted adult. When Izuku landed, it was on a soft, pillowy substance. It felt plant-like but was matte white and large as a car. Turning around, Izuku scanned his surroundings for anything he recognized. Between the warped skyscrapers in the distance, the maroon-tinted sky, and the endless fields of what looked like giant marshmallows, Izuku knew where he had landed. Earth H-24. Izuku yelled out into the plains. Thanks for the catch. A crack left in the sky seemed to smile, just without any facial features or indication of smiling whatsoever. Almost harvest time, huh? These raftallies are looking plump. Izuku said. Wait, the exam. H24, you have to send me back. Another pit opened in the ground. This one will send me somewhere safe this time, right? Izuku inquired, untrustingly. Because last time you said it was fine, but you dropped me in the Pacific. The pit nodded in affirmation, or at least tried to. It was just a hole in the ground. Thanks, the boy said as he hopped into the abyss. Izuku didn't quite recognize where he was once a new crack in the ceiling opened to deposit him, but it wasn't surrounded by miles of ocean, so that was a plus. Once again, the boy's fall was cushioned, though this time it was by a plush green couch. Izuku looked around the room he found himself in. He was alone in what looked like a break room or lounge. He sat up and walked to the door. I've got to get out of here so I can take my exams. The written exam is probably starting already. Izuku tried the door. But what kind of room locks from the inside? He thought. A room at Japan's best hero school, Izuku realized when he looked out the window to see the familiar throngs of prospective students making their way into the building from below. One spot on the sidewalk that stood out seemed shattered, as if something tore through the concrete from below and left a mound of dirt behind. I hope they get that fixed. 20 minutes later, Izuku was twiddling his thumbs on the couch. He had considered summoning a friend to help him out, but didn't want to risk any more property damage or manslaughter which could seem bad on his record. A click sounded from the door as the knob turned mechanically. Izuku leapt up from his seat and raced to the door. Instead of a teacher, like he expected, he only found an empty hallway occupied by a folded slip of paper. Looking down the hall and not finding the paper's owner, the boy picked the note up and unfolded it. The note read, Hello Izuku Midoriya. You have quite an odd quirk to have penetrated my school's anti-warping gates so easily. I must admit you had me quite startled when you pulled that stunt. I even considered detonating the incendiary device hidden in the room you warped to, just to be safe. Izuku paled and turned back to the room he was in just seconds prior. Despite my better judgment, I chose not to. Even I do not know why. Instead, I shall invite you to my office to explain yourself. I look forward to seeing you there. Perpetually and vaguely mammalian, Principal Nedzu. I'm supposed to go to Principal Nedzu's office? Izuku fussed. It's my first day and I'm already in trouble. Izuku looked around again. Just where was the principal's office, anyways? Izuku hadn't seen that room on the maps given to new students. Hoping for clues, Izuku turned the page over. On the reverse side, the following was written. This trip will be long, you'd better pack. You'll find a clue while you get yourself a snack. Huh? The boy asked baffled. He turned the note upside down but that didn't help. I just said what was written on it. So, like the cafeteria? Is this some sort of scavenger hunt? Since nobody was around to answer him, Izuku headed off down in the direction he knew the cafeteria was in. It was the opposite direction from the testing centers. Despite the anxiety he felt about missing his exams, the boy thought to himself, this could be fun. This is getting fun. Nedzu cackled to himself, tiny mammalian body swallowed in a plush swivel chair. His new test subject, Izuku Midoriya, had passed all of the rats' tests with flying colors. Now at the final puzzle, the boy was inside a dark janitor's closet dripping wet. For some reason typing a 24-character passcode into a hidden panel in the ceiling. With a beep, Izuku Midoriya found himself falling through the sky for the third time that morning. Third time's the charm, he thought as he landed roughly on the floor below. The trapdoor above the room closed with a mechanical whirring. Ow! Izuku pouted as he picked himself off the ground. I'm so sorry about that, young man. I suppose in all the excitement I forgot how humans don't fare well with unexpected falls. A posh voice sounded from above Izuku. The boy stood up to his full height and saw the goal of his plight sitting on a chair before him. Principal Nedzu! He yelled, pointing a finger out at the white mammal. That I am. The principal responded calmly. You wanted to see me here? I think. Izuku finished, losing some of his confidence. I walked all over the campus, scaled a window, swam in the pool, possibly punched an old lady? But I don't think she was a teacher. I didn't recognize her, anyways. And now I'm here, the boy declared proudly. Yes, I watched all of your progress from right here, Nezu explained, turning his computer around to face Izuku. The boy saw dozens of tiny screens, all showing live videos from all over the UA campus. Even your confrontation with old Ms. Ikeda, who is not, in fact, employed by UA. Don't worry, our lawyers will handle it. Back on subject, you passed the exams. You mean I'm going to be a hero? The boy asked. I'm a student now? Now. You still need to take your practical exams. Though with your quirk I imagine you won't have any issues. With all the excitement around the impromptu scavenger hunt, Izuku had forgotten all about the combat exam. When are those starting? He asked the rat. Right now. I look forward to seeing you there. I'll be watching, Nezu said, pushing a button on his desk. For the fourth time that day, the ground opened beneath Izuku Midoriya. Nezu watched as the boy disappeared down the chute that led to Gym Gamma. Once he was sure the boy was gone, he began to cackle. Then giggle. Eventually the principal was kicking his feet and snorting. He liked this one. And it wasn't just the intelligence the boy showed, it was his aura. Nezu found himself willing to do anything to protect the boy. The feeling was entirely unfamiliar, but the principal identified it as paternal instincts, of sorts. For some reason, he thought back to his days in the lab where he was created, and then to his time in government custody before was emancipated as a citizen. An SCP, they had called him. Nezu had heard rumors circulating his networks of a boy with command over powerful entities not bound by the laws of reality. Oh, how I hate to repeat myself, but I truly must say, this is getting fun. Izuku landed in a rough heap, falling through a vent panel in the wall beside Gym Gamma. A crowd of students stopped their conversation and stared. Sorry? Izuku managed. Is this where I go for the test? What were you doing in there? A stern voice called out from the crowd. It appeared to be coming from a tall boy with neat hair and glasses. It is a disrespect to the infrastructure of this fine institution to be crawling through the vents. Not to mention the fact that you're sopping wet. Oh, you must be the late little listener. A voice said that Izuku recognized as the voice hero, Present Mike. We were just about to head in to start the exam. But sir, the tall boy sputtered. He was crawling through the vents like a miscreant. Aren't you going to reprimand him? Relax, kiddo. The principal himself sent him our way, so there's nothing to worry about. Mike answered. Turning to Izuku, he asked, So little listener, you have any questions? I'm sure Nezu explained everything. Not really, Izuku answered, rubbing the back of his neck. Well, basically, we're killing robots. When I say go, you're going to run in there and start smashing robots. They'll all be marked with point totals, and whoever gets the most points wins. Mike explained concisely. That makes sense, Izuku said, but was cut off by the hero yelling, Go. The students stood around, hesitant to move forward. Well, get going. There are no countdowns in heroics. Present Mike yelled. Izuku ran towards the gym entrance, swallowed up in the crowd of rushing students. Yagi Tashinori stood in the corner of a dark room, watching the glowing screens that displayed footage from Gym Gamma intently. Nezu had offered him the room's empty chair, following his sudden appearance from the ceiling, but the retired hero had shot the offer down, almost fearfully. That earned him some strange looks from his co-workers, and an exasperated one from Eraserhead, who also chose to stand. My money's on the French kid. Midnight purred from her seat. Yagi found the student she was looking for. He was rather hard to miss as the boy shot a laser beam from his navel, instantly wrecking a 2-point robot. Yagi flinched at a noise but couldn't identify the source. It sounded familiar, but he wasn't sure from where. I will remind you, Miss Nemura, that betting on exam results is still unfortunately illegal. Besides, the real show has yet to begin. Nezu said from his large chair that towered above the rest of the faculties. The real show? What does that mean? Yagi began, interrupted by a sudden flood of dark red filling the streets of a testing center. What is that stuff? It almost looks like blood. Nedzu exclaimed, far too excited. I certainly didn't see this coming. As he spoke, the principal was typing out point totals. On examinee number 233, Izuku Midoriya's file, the Chimera was writing what looked to Yagi to be a math equation with multiple layers of factorials and exponents, like an onion made of algebra. As the faculty sat in silence, the rivers of blood continued to sweep across the city, filling every crevice of the exam site until at last it was still. In the end, the water was around 3 feet high, leaving most examinees about waist deep in the gore. Do we need to call the exam off? Ectoplasm asked the principal. No need, as I said the show is just beginning. Nedzu responded, eyes scanning the screen for something while he typed away furiously. Yagi caught sight of the boy just as Nedzu did. He was one of the few students not covered in red, likely because he was wading through the swamp on the back of some sort of grizzly bear if grizzly bears were covered in razor-sharp spines and had a gaping maw of teeth where a head should be. The color drained from Yagi's face as he watched the bear-like creature decimate a three-pointer, unfazed by the barrage of bullets it unleashed. The blonde turned to Aizawa and saw that he was catching on as well. It's him. Yagi whispered darkly. Aizawa gave the man no response, only watching in rapt horror as more spawn began to emerge from beneath the lake of blood. First came a swarm of metallic black spheres. They poured from the depths, from every street, further terrifying the already shaken crowd of examinees. As they emerged, some students tried to fight them but were unsuccessful in dealing even a modicum of damage to the orbs. Like homing missiles, they converged on their targets, melting the bots apart with what looked to be beams of dense radiation if the static taking over the camera system was anything to judge by. Get the students out of there. Yagi urged the principal. I know the boy we're dealing with and none of the students or us for that matter will be safe if we don't stop him now. Do you mean Izuku Midoriya? Yes, I'm well aware of the boy's abilities. Cease your fretting, this exam won't end in casualties. Probably, the principal said in response. He added that last part upon watching a lizard man of some sort, the product of the lake of blood, not a heteromorphic Quirk, rip apart a security camera with its gnashing teeth. The static feed that followed was a perfect soundtrack for the teacher's mounting horror. This is all the work of a single middle schooler? The teachers all thought. Approximately. Aizawa's thought process contained much more swearing. A tally sat in the corner of the screen, displaying the remaining number of bots. With a horrific crunch, a spread of tentacles looking to be straight out of the Necromicon pulled a one-pointer under the lake, leaking no trace. The counter clicked. I guess it's that time again. Nedzu said, pausing his maniacal typing for an instant to stretch his paws in front of himself prior to slamming a paw onto a glowing red button on the console. The zero-pointer? Nedzu, are you sure that's the best idea? Midnight asked, shedding her hero persona momentarily out of concern for her wards. The students are already confused and panicking from those monsters and all the blood throwing a 20-ton robot into all that would just make chaos. Chaos is my favorite word. The rat said chipperly. The surface of the pool of blood began to quake, and the walls of the city shook. Something was coming. And it was big. Izuku wiped his brow. Summoning friends usually came effortlessly to him, but such a large-scale assault was beginning to make his head ache. I hope I got enough points to pass by now, the boy thought to himself worriedly. Present Mike hadn't told him how many points constituted a passing grade before sending them off. On top of that, even from his high vantage point on top of his new grizzly friend, he couldn't see the progress made by his other summons from the pool of blood. Oddly enough, Izuku hadn't seen any bots for a while now. It was like they all vanished. All he had seen were examinees, soaked in blood and hiding behind buildings' windows and on abandoned cars. When they caught sight of Izuku and his ride, they all just paled and fled. A few were brave enough to wade through the pool of blood, but they didn't make much progress. The blood was thick and waist-deep, slowing down the movements of all who dared traverse it. In a landscape increasingly overrun by creatures straight out of nightmares, finding a dry place to hide was the safest option. The surface of the water shook, and soon it began to move. Faster and faster the water rushed by Izuku's mount. Other students weren't so lucky, however, some were being swept away by the rushing current. Fearing that he might fall in, Izuku made a split-second decision. "Thanks, Blood Pond, you can go now," Izuku called. As he did, the rushing river slowed, losing depth quickly until a shallow layer of crimson was all that remained. Habitat quickly disappearing, the spawn of the lake of blood moved swiftly back to the puddles, and dove through them. Izuku's ride was swallowed by the pool beneath it, the boy clambering off onto the ground. With a final growling noise coming from its maw, it slipped beneath the blood. Now the only proof that remained was the dark red stained into the examinee's clothes, as they lay gasping for air on the now empty streets. Smiling with satisfaction, Izuku found the time to wonder, what was causing those waves anyway? A question instantly answered as the boy gazed up to the looming form of the seventh largest robot he had ever seen. The remaining students stampeded towards the exit, the appearance of the zero-pointer robot apparently their tipping point. Figuring it wouldn't be worth the effort to destroy, Izuku turned and nearly began to run as well until he saw the girl. It was the same brown-haired girl from before, the one who had tried to catch him when he tripped. Before he realized what was happening, Izuku was running towards the towering machine. "You've got to get out of here," Izuku called out, but the girl didn't answer, leg pinned underneath some rubble, likely made by one of Izuku's lizard spawn. The girl wrenched her leg free with a grunt of pain, just as Izuku was within 100 feet of the robot. Izuku held his hands out in front of himself and poured as much willpower as possible into this summoning. He needed to avoid major collateral damage while also taking out the zero-pointer quickly. He didn't have time to flip through his mental database for any specific tech-manipulating friend, so numbers were the way to go. A single teddy bear fell to the ground with a soft thump. Before Izuku could process what happened, the bear was already off like a shot, making a running leap directly onto the automaton. As it landed, it began to enthusiastically tear chunks of metal from the robot's exterior. As ruthless as the teddy was, it wasn't going to be able to disassemble the zero-pointer before it reached the children. Thankfully, that wasn't the goal. Molding the scrap in its paws like they were putty, the teddy bear fashioned a makeshift teddy bear from the metal. As soon as its ears were in place, the metal bear came to life and began to tear away at the robot as well. Working together, the two bears quickly became 4, then 8. Exponentially, the bears grew in number as they stripped the robot to its bare frame. Internal components devoured, the behemoth stopped in its tracks, stripped down to a wireframe skeleton of what once was. In its place was a mountain of silver bears, dropping from the sky like the shed scales of a dragon. Izuku breathed a sigh of relief. He rushed over to the girl in the street and offered her his hand. "Need some help?" he asked. Stunned, she said nothing, only staring at the sight of the ever-replicating teddy bears, as they began to demolish the nearby buildings for their army of fluff. Suddenly, a more urgent look of fear overtook her expression. "Look out!" she screamed, leaping to Izuku's side and shoving him roughly to the ground. With a horrible grinding noise, a shard of metal shrapnel 4 inches wide dropped from the husk was driven into the ground between the two teens, with Izuku's left leg in the middle. Ochako Uraraka screamed. In an off-site observatory, a principal screeched, mimicking his colleague's panic for the first time in the entire exam. "Don't worry, it's a clean cut, I'll be fine." Izuku placated. Uraraka was not calmed in the slightest. Her already blood-soaked hands were further bathed in crimson as she grabbed the severed end of the boy's leg and tried to bring it to its other half, as if it would magically reattach. As if to prove his point, Izuku turned away from his crisis entirely and towards his army of bears. "You can go now," he called. As suddenly as they'd appeared, the waves of teddies were gone. And Izuku's leg was still gushing blood. A chair rose from the ground beneath the boy, prompting a scream from Uraraka, and for a certain blonde teacher to pass out elsewhere. Moving at lightning speeds, arms emerged from the chair's base and began to tear away at the boy's left pant leg. The boy showed no reaction but a cringe as a cord was tightly tied above his thigh, staving off blood flow to the exposed flesh. Whimpering, Uraraka's face was flicked with tiny splatters of blood as the arms surgically removed tiny bits of shattered bone and metal from the muscle fibers. Meeting Izuku's eyes, she saw not even a modicum of fear. Discomfort, sure. But he displayed no real emotion, as if this situation was entirely normal to him. Something was being tugged from Uraraka's grip, and it took her several moments to refocus her eyes and realize that one of the metal arms was pulling the severed leg from her grasp. Fully realizing what she was holding, the girl's grip instantly loosened, and the arm swiftly moved the limb to its proper place and began to clean it just the same as its other end. Uraraka vomited, collapsing to the pavement. The last thing she saw before she passed out was a needle, sewing the two ends of a leg back together with startling efficiency. If this is what being a hero looks like, I'm not so sure about this anymore. Tenya Ida was irritated. The teachers at UA High School, Japan's most prominent and official hero school, had just proctored the most mind-boggling exam Ida had ever taken place in. For one, there was the river of blood. It seemed to come out of nowhere and clogged up his engines, leaving his Quirk useless. Next came the creatures spawning out of the lake, which proceeded to destroy every single robot and gather up an obscene number of points. Whoever was responsible clearly had no exam etiquette, nor were they concerned for the safety of their fellow examinees. After a quick checkup with the frazzled school nurse, recovery girl, Ida went stomping off in the direction of the nearest proctor. "Sir," Ida's discontented voice piped up among the crowd of students surrounding present Mike. This exam was unfairly biased. The vast majority of points were taken by a single individual, meaning that this institution would fail an entire group of students based on arbitrary factors and random chance. I simply cannot let this injustice go unmentioned, and furthermore as I was just explaining to all these other listeners, if you'd like to retake this exam you can head on down to Gym Delta. Present Mike cut him off. We have 1 or 2 students every year, usually ones with technology manipulation quirks, admittedly that wreck all the bots in one go and leave nothing for the other listeners. When that happens, we just shuttle the leftovers over to another gym and call it a day. He explained chipperly. Oh, well, good then. Ida finished, cowed by the easy explanation from the hero. You're quite the stickler for the rules, huh? Present Mike asked, eyebrow raised. Ida stood taller, puffing up his chest in pride. Of course, I've read the student handbook dozens of times to ensure that I uphold the law of this institution with dignity. You look like someone who'd memorized the student handbook. Mike thought, though he didn't dare say it aloud. Chio Shizenji rushed about the blood-stained streets of Gym Gamma, medical bots in tow. Recovery girl's here, dearie, she said as she planted a kiss on a French-looking teen's head. Soon enough he ceased his whimpering, the cut running along his forearm closing itself up and fading. The last wave caused by that infernal giant robot Nedzu liked so much had banged up several students enough to require immediate medical attention. Once one child was healed and directed to the exit, she immediately hurried over to the next patient. There was never time to rest as a school nurse, after all. Or there wasn't, anyways. Not before she met him. Despite it being covered in blood and gore, and surrounded by piles of scrap metal, Chio could clearly see the sleek curves and aesthetically pleasing antique finish that lay beneath the grime. That day, in the middle of a battlefield, Chio Shizenji met the chair of her dreams. The school nurse's office would never be the same. Ochako Uraraka left UA. She had heard present Mick's explanation, of course, but just wasn't mentally or physically prepared to take another exam so soon. That severed leg, and the warmth it exuded in her hands wasn't something she could forget so easily. She only hoped that the few robots she had managed to destroy while floating past the flooded streets on a sheet of scrap metal would be enough to score her a seat in her dream school. Bakugo Katsuki was shivering. He had never realized just how sticky blood felt, or how much it resembled the feeling of his sweet, nitroglycerin sweat against his skin. That wasn't true. Katsuki remembered the feeling of blood on his hands as the copper-scented liquid slicked the floor in a dark planetarium. He had seen Izuku's dramatic entrance just before the exam, and he knew just as well that everything to happen during that whole gosh darn fiasco they called an exam was all his fault. Katsuki marched with the stream of students in the direction of the replacement exam and tried once more to incinerate the sticky feeling from his hands, sending sparks flying as he did. But the blood wasn't sweat, so it simply stuck to his palms, staining them with the remnants of memories he wished to forget. Izuku paced the floor of his living room. The acceptance or rejection letter from UA was supposed to have arrived hours ago at noon. "It's going to be fine, Izuku," Midoriya assured her son. "The mail must just be late. There's no way any school would reject someone as smart and kind as you." "Yeah, I hope so," he answered, but his pacing didn't slow in the slightest. The next day, the boy once again rushed to the apartment's mailbox and fumbled the key into the lock. The latch unstuck, and Izuku slammed the door open with a clang. "Bill, spam, chain letter, bill, health insurance," he said as he rifled through the stack of mail. He reached the end of the stack and stopped. No UA letter. Slowly the boy walked back into his apartment, weighed down by his increasingly heavy thoughts. What if I didn't get in? I heard they send a rejection letter, but what if I'm such a lost cause that they didn't bother? Is this because of Ms. Ikeda? I thought Principal Nedzu said that it was fine. I bet they all hate me too. Izuku dropped down onto the couch and covered his head with his arm. A long, dark, spindly hand reached from the corner of the room to pat the boy's head. "Thanks, Uncle," Izuku said. "I know you just want to cheer me up, but I'd like to be alone right now." The look he gave his crooked uncle was just tired. Like the full weight of his own existence was bearing down on himself today more than usual. With a sad, staticky noise, the creature crept away, leaving the boy behind to wallow in his self-deprecating thoughts. On the third day, Izuku wasn't sure if he wanted to know his results anymore. He simply sat at home all day, never leaving the house. When noon came and passed him by, he only retreated farther into his nest of blankets from his place on the couch and turned the TV up louder. "I already know what I'm going to find," he thought to himself. Sitting there on the couch, Izuku's thoughts trailed back to Katsuki. He furiously scrubbed his eyes when tears pricked at their edges. "My best friend hates me. He's always hated me." The boy turned the TV up louder once more. Before Izuku knew it, hours had passed him by unnoticed. His restless afternoon was interrupted when his mom came home just after 5. "Izuku, honey, you haven't moved from that spot since I left this morning, have you?" Inko admonished upon seeing her son. "You need to eat something and get some sunshine. It is summer after all." Inko realized that her son wasn't getting up. "Is it the entrance exams? I told you I know that you aced those, so cheer up." "But what if I don't?" Izuku whispered, his response muffled through a thick cover of blankets. "What if they're all the same? What if they think I'm a monster and don't want anything to do with me?" Inko's breath hitched in her throat. "A monster? Honey, you're not a monster. What would give you that idea?" she asked sadly. Izuku's face was covered, but she could still see the top of the linens as they quivered. "I'm going to go outside," the boy announced, throwing off his blankets and turning from his mom. He immediately began to rush for the door. "Izuku, please, let's talk about this," she said as she grabbed the end of her son's sleeve. For a split second, Midoriya saw her son's face, eyes red and tears streaming down his face. These weren't the usual Midoriya tears. These were tears of despair. She let go of the boy's arm and he ran out the door. Izuku didn't come home when she called him for dinner, nor until late into the night, the telltale sound of a latch signaling his return. For the first time in years, Midoriya slept restlessly. Izuku awoke to a feeling of guilt. First his uncle, then his mother. He had pushed away all of those who just wanted to help him. He was already a monster, and now he was a selfish one too. He groaned and turned over to see his alarm clock. 10:34, it read. "I must have forgotten to set my alarm last night," the boy thought as he picked himself up. "Mom probably left for work already." Izuku padded his way out to the living room. He momentarily thought about eating breakfast, but the knot in his stomach disagreed. Sitting down on the sofa, the boy didn't bother to even turn the TV on. Staring at the wall blankly, another 2 hours passed him by. "Izuku, are you feeling better?" A voice appeared from behind him. Izuku leapt to his feet, startled. He was expecting to see a stranger behind himself for the second time. He instead only saw his mother, bags under her eyes and holding some kind of gray bundle of cloth in her arms. What are you doing here? I thought you went to work already. The boy asked. I called in sick, Inko answered, squeezing the bundle between her hands. I've spent today sewing in my office. With that, she unfurled her bundle, revealing a simple, dark gray jumpsuit, stitched together with a bright teal embroidery thread that clashed horribly with the rest of the suit. I know that hero schools make your costumes for you, but I just thought, I thought that I'd make something for you anyways. She announced proudly. It was ugly, sure. The stitching was uneven, and it certainly wasn't support grade, but Izuku found himself tearing up anyways. Look, Zuku, if UA doesn't want you, then it's their loss. Inko cried, literally, as tears ran down her face. Mom, Izuku responded, tears now flowing down his own face as well. He hugged his mother, thoughts of bullies and exam results forgotten in an instant. Who needs them anyway? He had his family, and they loved him no matter what. If that wasn't enough, what could be? Come on, let's check the mail. It should have come by now. Inko said after a few dozen more minutes of sobbing and hugging. And if the letter isn't here yet, we can start on your application for Shiketsu, how's that? Izuku nodded, and together they walked down to their mailbox. With shaking fingers, he opened the door. Right on top of the stack, the red wax seal embossed with the letters, U, sat. The boy and his mother grabbed the letter and ran back up the stairs, the rest of their mail forgotten. Tearing the paper to shreds, the Midoriyas watched as a metal disc fell from the envelope, the size of a silver dollar. With a flicker and a beep, light shone from the top of the disc, forming into a hologram. Hey little listener. A staticky voice said from the device. Wide-eyed, the mother and her son shared a shocked glance at this overly engineered solution to a non-issue. First, apologies are in order for the late arrival of these letters. The recording of present mic turned to look at someone off-screen. Someone who shall remain nameless took out our servers by entering a point total so high our CPUs couldn't process it. Technical issues? That's all it was. Izuku thought to himself. That's kind of anticlimactic. Anyways, despite the significant property damage and emotional trauma you were involved in, you managed to score the highest point total in UA history. Inko squealed and clutched her son in a hug. You did it, Zuku, you really did it. Welcome to your hero academia, Izuku Midoriya. The hologram finished, then shut off abruptly. Once again, Izuku was sobbing. But this time they weren't tears of despair, instead the boy was smiling, eagerly anticipating the next 3 years of his life. Aizawa-san, please. Whatever you do, you need to expel that kid. Yagi begged. Yagi had approached his colleague in the break room after the others had all left to prepare for the first day. Before he could get a chance to slip away and take a power nap in his cocoon, Aizawa's ears were being assaulted by Dollar Store Johnny Bravo. Wasn't it you who chided me last year for expelling a class? Aizawa retorted dryly. That's a different situation altogether and you know it. Yagi huffed indignantly. That class could have been wonderful heroes, but Izuku Midoriya will do no such thing. I'm telling you right here and now that boy is bad news. Aizawa rubbed his temples and sighed deeply. After a moment he responded with, fine. But only because you covered for me during the umbrella incident, okay? After this we're even. Hardly a fair trade, Yagi said from the corner of his mouth. You want me to expel the heckin' kid or not? The dark-haired man retorted. When his colleague made no move to answer, he climbed into his sleeping bag and began the long crawl to his classroom. When Aizawa reached the door to Class 1A, he didn't get the shocked expressions or exclamations of, why is there a hobo in here? Or, it's a giant caterpillar. Quick, hide your leaves and strawberries and slices of pie. Instead, he was met with a room of students panicking far before he arrived. First, he noticed one boy in the back corner of the room, Bakugo Katsudon or something, holding his sparking hands in front of himself defensively, as if saying, don't come closer or I'll explode. Next was another dozen students congregating near the back left corner of the room. Weirdly enough, that French-looking student, another who looked like a crow, and Endeavor's kid were sitting calmly in their seats despite all the chaos, but Aizawa didn't want to get into that, honestly. What's going on? Class 1, as teacher's gravelly voice asked, causing most of the class turn to look at him, all shooting him the familiar looks of fear and apprehension that he was expecting. Aizawa-sen, sensei. A classmate fainted, and we were simply trying to resuscitate her as outlined in the student handbook. Tenya Ida, also known as Aizawa's godson, answered. That's in the handbook? That feels really specific, but honestly, I trust Tenya to know better than myself. Well, it's time for a quirk apprehension test, so put your books away and head down to the sports field. With that, the teacher walked over to the still unconscious girl and lifted her up, slumping her over his shoulder as he walked, sleeping bag discarded. Passing by the still speechless class, he caught sight of a boy with a mop of green hair, watching the proceedings guiltily. So, this is the kid I'm meant to watch out for. Aizawa thought to himself. He doesn't look like much up close, but clearly he did something to make this girl faint in the 10 seconds I was late, so maybe Yagi has a point. Izuku rushed to throw on his gym uniform and meet his classmates outside. He fumbled getting his arm into his sleeve, mind still racing with the events that transpired at the start of class. Izuku hadn't done much, just walk in the door and greet the couple friends he had met earlier that month, but before he even finished introducing himself to the uptight boy with glasses, the girl who had saved him from the shrapnel during the exam passed out at her desk at the sight of him. I hope she's all right. Izuku thought to himself as he fixed his shirt and ran out the door to catch up with the rest. But we're going to miss orientation, a girl's voice said from the crowd of students. Izuku recognized it as the girl from before. He was glad to see her awake and mostly fine, if not frazzled looking. When she caught sight of him as he approached, she managed to stay conscious. This is a school for heroes. We'd only waste time spending it on pointless ceremonies. Their teacher said in response. Turning to Katsuki, who was watching Izuku warily from the corner of his eye, he asked, "How far was your softball throw in junior high?" 67 meters, I think. The boy answered. Now try throwing it again. And with your quirk this time. You asked for it, old man. With that, Katsuki threw the ball like a cannon, explosions lighting up his arm and propelling the ball up into the air. 705.2 meters, the gauge on Aizawa's handheld device read. The class dissolved into a flurry of cheers and whoops. This is gonna be fun. A pink-haired girl cheered. Aizawa saw his chance and took it. Fun, you say? Because in my mind heroics are quite a serious business. Just for that, I will be expelling whoever doesn't put their full effort into the test today immediately. Izuku might have been imagining it, but it almost seemed like the teacher was looking straight into his eyes as he said those words. Following their new teacher, the class of students walked past the softball throw and to the first examination site. It was a 50-meter dash. Izuku swallowed. I'm not that fast, what if I get expelled for this? His fears came to a rest, however, as he watched a girl with long black hair create a flip-in motorcycle and course across the 50-meter range, instantly blowing the kid with tape elbows score out of the water. That's right. The boy realized, I can summon my friends for this test, this'll be a piece of cake. When it was his turn to go, Katsuki was his selected running mate. Tisich, the angry teen scoffed, turning to face the finish line. Despite his aggressive posture, there was a slightly pale tint to his skin and a barely perceptible twitch to his fingers. I'm going to beat you, freak. Katsuki growled. Izuku shrunk in on himself. And not if I catch my train first. The boy yelled back, running in the opposite direction of the goal. What the flip? Katsuki swore, turning to his teacher. Aizawa only shrugged as if to say, don't look at me, I'm just the teacher. Seeing his chance to twist the results as he watched the boy run away from the starting line, Aizawa yelled, go, and quickly hit his stopwatch. But just as the words left his mouth, actually no, even before he had begun to speak, Izuku stepped out of thin air and onto the finish line. What? But I thought, then where'd the green kid go? The pink girl from earlier asked. She turned to watch as a second Izuku Midoriya stopped right outside the door leading back into the school. Then the class watched in bewildered silence as the screeching sound of a subway could be heard, accompanied by flashing lights through the school windows and a rumbling from below. "Please stand clear of the track," a disembodied voice said from the direction of the building. With that, the doors opened for the boy. Were those doors always automatic? And Izuku stepped in, the door closing itself behind him with a mechanical whoosh. Once again, the noise and lights were there, slowly dissipating after a moment or two. "Aizawa-sensei, does a negative time count as 0 or bonus points?" The remaining Izuku asked from his place at the end of the track. "Well, when how?" The teacher eloquently responded. "Oh, the train," the boy asked, tilting his head. "That's the time travel subway." I figured, what speed is faster than time travel, you know? I made sure not to mess with the fabric of space-time, I swear. He finished, waving his hands in front of himself in his defense. Aizawa just stared blankly. "Time travel," he said dully, then abruptly turned on his heel and started speed walking away from the group of students. Once he was far enough, he pulled a flask of some sort from his belt and took a swig, staring at the sky. Katsuki remained on his placeholder for the 50-meter dash. He hadn't taken a step from it since the race had begun. "What the heck? That's an awesome power." A boy with bright yellow hair, Izuku thought his name was Kaminari, piped up. The rest of the students were quick to follow suit, offering their praise and congratulations. "What a mad banquet of darkness," a boy with a crow Quirk said. "Your splendor almost outshines even yours truly's." Some French kid said, "I think it was reckless to meddle with the laws of nature like that." The boy with peppermint-colored hair said, "Hey, I lost my wallet 3 years ago, could your Quirk help me find it?" A girl with audio jacks hanging from her earlobes asked. Okay, it wasn't exactly praise, but Izuku was happy to take what he could get. After years of bullying and criticism, it was nice to finally have kids not fear him for his power. "Are we done here, or do you need more time to babble?" Their teacher's voice asked, returned from his isolation. "I'm done with my coffee, so how about we see how well your time travel train helps you with a long jump?" "Hey," Katsuki called out. "I still haven't run my 50-meter dash, or are you blind or something?" Aizawa sighed. "Fine, run your race." He got 4.13 seconds. Scowling, the blonde boy stomped off to the long jump track. To the collective disbelief of Aizawa and Class 1A, Izuku proceeded to summon a wide variety of objects and creatures for all the remaining tests. These included an ordinary-looking pogo stick that launched Izuku hundreds of meters into the air during the standing long jump and turned him into a mere blur for the repeated side steps. A taxicab that appeared from thin air, making its way in loops around the distance run until Aizawa, exasperated, declared the test over. A jacket which, when worn, sprouted muscular adult arms from the sleeves. Izuku used this jacket for the grip strength test, as well as the seated toe touch, the muscular arms replaced by tentacles that stretched the full length of the gym. Keeping the jacket on, Izuku walked with the rest of the group towards back to the exam's starting point, the softball throw. His classmates walked with him, eagerly discussing their performance with each other. Gone was the somber mood from before, when the possibility of being expelled was announced. One student, however, wasn't taking place in the cheery atmosphere like the rest. Momo Yaoyorozu had been watching Izuku's performances, and as time went on, she felt more and more dissatisfied with her own performance. Here was another student with a quirk much like her own but with none of the limitations. He created several large objects without much effort, only tiring slightly, and the things he summoned didn't even follow the laws of physics. It was like staring at a perfect, unattainable version of her own quirk. Yaoyorozu envied the boy, though she didn't say it aloud. Reaching the softball throw, the students lined up and began their pitches. Izuku was surprised at the creativity some of the students showed with their quirks. The boy with the electric hair, Kaminari Denki, used his quirk to shock his arm, stimulating his muscles for an extra strong toss, for example. Then there was Uraraka Ochako, who earned a score of infinity by removing the gravity on her softball and causing it to fly into space. Finally, Izuku watched as Yaoyorozu conjured a cannon. Her ball went flying, earning here a score that topped Katsuki's by a whopping 102.7 meters. Izuku stepped into the ring, ready to take his turn. A new arm appeared from the sleeve, a lean and muscular arm with a talent for baseball. Winding up for a throw, Izuku felt a ringing sensation in the back of his head. Almost like he could feel someone's eyes on him but cranked up to, "You're over-relying on your quirk. You need to learn that no power is infallible." Aizawa started, but was cut off by a sudden scream of pain. With a horrible tearing and crunching sound, the jacket fell from Izuku's shoulders, his arms consumed. Izuku was left standing in a pitching stance, only nubs of his arms remaining. The skin had been twisted into a knot at the ends, slowing the bleeding to a drip by stretching and deforming what remained of his limbs. Breathing heavily, it took the boy a moment to regain his composure. His classmates screamed in unison. Uraraka puked, and very nearly lost consciousness once more, but managed to hold on. Each one of the students panicked, but none dared to approach the boy. Some of the more capable hero students had taken first aid training and CPR classes prior to UA, but none were prepared for an injury of this magnitude. Aizawa had no such hindrance, as he immediately ran to the boy, and was about to touch his arms but thought better of it. Redacted, Aizawa swore, his hair flopping down into place over his eyes once more, as they ceased their red glow. "Did my quirk do that? Redacted kid, let's get you to recovery girl now." Fine sensei. It's really not a big deal, my friends haven't hurt me like this before, only ever by accident, so it's my fault really. The boy rambled, apparently not distressed about the thought of losing half his limbs even slightly. "Shut up and start walking," the teacher ordered, tugging the boy by the shirt towards the school. "We're going in to see recovery girl. She's been keeping that chair of yours in her office, and the sooner we get you into it the better. I don't care how often you lose limbs, you need medical attention now." Although Aizawa's voice left no room for argument, Izuku sure tried. Planting his feet in the ground, he begged, "Please sensei, let me throw the ball. I don't want to get expelled, I just can't." The teacher paused momentarily, thrown off by the change of subject. Seeing his chance, Izuku continued. "If I can't throw the ball with my arms, I'll use my legs. And if I lose my legs, I'll use my teeth. Just please don't make me give up my dream of being a hero." For the first time, Aizawa looked at the boy. There wasn't an ounce of deception in his eyes, just unfiltered determination. Aizawa was then hit by a sudden realization that he was about to expel this kid. Izuku had never even had a chance. Talk about illogical, the man would have gotten rid of a kid with more potential than most pros. And for what? Settling a debt with Yagi? As far as Aizawa was concerned, that debt disappeared the moment he used his erasure to critically wound an innocent child. "You're not getting expelled, nobody is. That was just a logical ruse." The teacher lied through his teeth. "Now will you please get inside? I'm already getting fired, I don't want a dead student on top of that." He finished, grimly. Still determined to finish his test, Izuku held his ground. He was unable to argue further, however, as a roaring noise like an aircraft was getting louder and louder by the second. Kaminari screamed, saying something like, "A shooting star." Upon inspection, he wasn't staring at his wounded classmate anymore, but into the sky. Aizawa followed his gaze to see what looked like a tiny black comet, hurtling ever closer to the ground. Before anyone could react, the meteor slammed into the ground. The impact tossed the students and teacher back several feet, screaming as they were thrown. When the dust cleared, all that was left was a crater where the softball throw circle was, the dropped softball nowhere to be seen. Looking to the sky, Aizawa could see the fast retreating that must have been the meteor, breaking through the cloud cover with the force of a jet as it re-exited the stratosphere. "Superball!" Izuku exclaimed, muffled, from his place on the ground. He was face down and had no viable way to pick himself up with the recent loss of his arms. "You came back." Aizawa's reader beeped and displayed an error message. The teacher supposed that the super ball must have taken the softball with it once it left planet Earth. Turning to his face-planted problem student, Aizawa offered, "Congrats kid, you somehow managed to beat a score of infinity." You've proved your point. Now you're going inside to the nurse's office even if it kills me. With that, he hefted the student onto his back like a sack of potatoes and ran as fast as he could through the open doors to the school. It probably will, if Netsu has anything to do with it. He thought to himself as he ran. Shell-shocked, Class 1A didn't move from their places on the ground, trying to process the events that had just transpired. After what felt like hours but was more like 2 minutes, Kaminari Denki filled the silence by announcing, "Man, I forgot to make a wish." The class burst out laughing, their stress dissolving instantly. Wiping her eyes, Yaoyorozu thought to herself, maybe his quirk isn't perfect, and decided in that moment, covered in dust and clumps of earth, that she would use the tools she had and surpass Izuku Midoriya. Incident Report 1300B14. Level 5 security clearance is required for examining this document. SCP involved: SCP-8502, SCP-1300. Personnel involved: Agent redacted, name redacted. Date: XXXXXX. Location: Udata High School, Mustafa, Japan. Description: at XXXXAM on XXXXX, SCP-8502 experienced an injury of a similar magnitude to that outlined in Incident Report 1300B13. Despite the similar nature of these injuries, anomalies in containment did not display the same levels of agitation as they did in previous instances of SCP-8502 experiencing bodily harm. Agent redacted, who was on the scene at the time and has been assigned to the monitoring of SCP-8502, theorized that this was due to the nature of the SCP-3396 ability possessed by an instructor at Utah University also on the scene. The instructor, name redacted, has an SCP-3396 ability which can be used to erase other anomalous features of SCP-3396-01 via visual contact. When used on SCP-8502, this apparently removed its ability to communicate with all other anomalies, as well as their inability to harm SCP. It is recommended that name redacted be considered heavily as a viable containment method for SCP. However, as a civilian, the involvement of instructor name redacted is only to be used as a last resort in this case. Intake Report 1300B14. Agent redacted, S. First-hand incident report. He SCP-8502 is not a normal classmate. Most of the civilians he interacts with do not comprehend just how much of a threat he poses to human civilization. Although some do, his personable nature fools even the most trained of eyes. For the duration of my time on this case, I shall make sure to uphold the mission of the Foundation and contain this anomaly post-haste. Addendum 1300B14. Agent redacted confirmed, via verbal communication between SCP-8502 and instructor name redacted, that SCP-8502 was responsible for the disappearance of SCP-1300 and confirmed its current location. SCP-1300 is not to be retrieved until SCP-8502 has been contained to conserve Foundation resources. When Tenya Ida boarded the train to UA the morning of his second day, 15 minutes early of course, he wasn't sure what to expect. Tensei and Aizawa had of course described how chaotic UA High School could be, and as they were both alumni and his godfather a teacher, Tenya believed them. Still, he expected logic and reason from such a heralded institute, which was far from what he experienced during his first day. Instead, he had seen a peer lose his arms, conjure a series of reality-altering items and a regular-seeming taxicab, and when all was said and done, life just went on as usual. Everyone picked themselves up and just went to the next classes for the day. It was illogical, Ida decided. Still, he couldn't say much as he was currently making the commute right back into that den of chaos. His train slowed to a stop and the boy followed the crowd out of the emptying vehicle. Stepping through the tall doors of classroom 1, Ida was greeted with a mostly empty room. Aizawa was laying on the floor behind his lectern, as he tended to do on days following late-night patrols. The only other students were ones Ida recognized from his recommendation exam: Shuto Todoroki and Momo Yaoyorozu. Ida took his seat and watched as the rest of class began to file in after himself. Uraraka looked much better than she had following the Quirk apprehension exam. Ida couldn't blame her, It was a rather grisly scene to behold. Katsuki seemed to be back to his usual angry self as well. Barking at the extras, blocking the doorway as he entered, he then proceeded to put his feet right on the desk, earning him a harsh reprimand from Ida, which was promptly ignored. As the flow of students trickled to a halt, Ida noted that Izuku Midoriya hadn't shown up yet. Following his spectacular injury the previous day, and the fact that he hadn't shown up in any of the days following classes made most students conclude that he would be taking a long break from school to recuperate. So, it was a complete surprise to all the students but Ochako and Katsuki that Izuku ran through the door just as the bell rang, out of breath but somehow with each and every limb intact. The class exploded with noise as they caught sight of the green-haired boy, exclaiming things like, "No way! You survived! And, how'd you grow new arms? I thought that was Shoji's quirk." "Hush!" Aizawa ordered from the front of class. Instantly the students fell silent, not willing to defy their teacher after witnessing his quirk arm deletion in action. Good, now let's get into today's activities. First, I'll be handing you off to your practical heroics teacher, Yagi Tashinori. Ida knew of Yagi from his godfather's constant griping about the man but was surprised to note that Izuku seemed to recognize the name as well. Through the door walked a tall, skinny man with long locks of blonde hair. His posture was oddly nervous for someone in his profession, and he kept nervously glancing right at the green boy, further proving to Ida that there was some connection between the two. Yagi opened his mouth to speak, but was cut off by Izuku, calling out, "Listen, I didn't know you would be my teacher. Is your wound feeling any better?" The man just looked nauseous at that question and refused to answer. Because of that, the class came to the unanimous conclusion that Izuku Midoriya had somehow gotten in a fight with their new teacher before ever coming to UA. Half the class stared surprised at Izuku, shocked that a student could wound a specialist in practical combat, and the other half looked to the teacher, in awe that he managed to survive with no visible injuries. Yagi moved on. "Today we will be having a practical combat lesson. Please meet me in ground beta." With that, he turned on his heel and speed walked out of class. Aizawa sighed heavily. "Since that bozo didn't give you the details, I'll fill you in." With that, he pressed a button on his desk, causing the wall to rotate, revealing 20 identical boxes the size of briefcases. These are your hero costumes. This exercise will be to gauge how well you work in your costumes and whether you need to make any adjustments or not. The class whooped in joy and rushed to grab their numbered cases from the wall. Ida waited in ground beta for the other students to get ready. His costume may look rigid and difficult to put on, but it was more flexible than it looked. The boy had been designing his costume since he was 6 and had long since found the balance between practicality and functionality. From the looks of it though, some of his classmates weren't so thoughtful about their designs. The most horrendous costume Ida spotted was that of a toddler-sized kid with what looked like a diaper around his waist that was twice the size of his head. That costume was closely followed by Momo Yaoyorozu's and Shudo Todoroki's, with costumes that consisted of an ultra-deep V-neck and a solid block of ice, respectively. Ida knew that hero costumes weren't always practical. Wash's was a prime example of that fact. But still, the stupidity of whoever designed those outfits miffed the boy. Looking around, Ida spotted a few good designs. Tsuyu Ajui's was both practical and stylish, and Katsuki Bakugo's was one of the best costumes Ida had seen in years. His eyes happened upon Izuku, whose gear looked just as ominous as his aura was. The costume comprised mostly of a dark gray bodysuit, highlighted by teal embroidery thread along the joints and edges. A dark maroon hood sat atop the boy's head, the teal thread making the impression of teeth in a gaping mouth. Furthermore, thick metal cuffs were locked over his wrists and ankles, metal chains hanging from them and running up his arms and over his chest. "Your attention, please," Yagi announced, holding a box in front of himself. "Please come forward and select a ball from this box. On it you will find a number corresponding to your teammate, as well as your alignment for this exercise." Ida picked out a ball and read it. "Team D, Villian." Looking around, Ida soon found his teammate, who was loudly protesting his villain designation. Katsuki Bakugo. Ida thought. He took 3rd place in the entrance exams and has an excellent control over his quirk. Katsuki read the print on Ida's ball and thought, Well, it could be worse. I could have gotten tail or small fry, at least 4 eyes seems somewhat capable. Both boys' confidence evaporated immediately as Yagi announced who they would be facing. Team A heroes, Uraraka Ochako and Izuku Midoriya. Hearing this assignments, Katsuki, Ochako, Ida and Yagi all began to write themselves a mental last will and testament. I shall defend the weapon, Ida declared, now entrenched in his base for the exercise. The goal was to defend a papier-mâché nuclear warhead from the opposing heroes. Like heck you will, Katsuki shot back. You go out there and fight them, I'm stronger so I'll defend the weapon. This argument had been going nowhere for the past 5 minutes. They were at an impasse, neither boy willing to be the sacrificial lamb tossed to the, possibly literal, wolves. Well, someone needs to be the one to face our enemies, and your quirk isn't suited to small spaces. Ida countered, thinking back to the time Izuku had caused blood to flood the streets and nightmarish beasts to hunt down their enemies with terrifyingly deadly force. Says the extra with a running quirk, big lot of good that does you in a cramped room, huh? Katsuki countered, remembering the sound of cracking bone, the popping noise as ligaments know. Not going to go there. Before they could argue the point any further, the door to the room slammed open, revealing none other than Uraraka Ochako. Run! The girl screamed, fear etching her face. Get out before it finds you. Ida had moved to capture the girl, tape in hand, but paused upon registering her words. What's coming? He asked. His question was answered by a skittering noise, like the uncut nails of a tiny dog on porcelain tile, if the dog was running as fast as a train. The noise was getting louder. I'm not scared of whatever that nerd throws at me, Katsuki barked, his scrunched eyebrows and stutter betraying his words. I'm not letting him win this if it's the last thing I do. Uraraka screamed and threw her hands over her head, running for cover by the wall adjacent to the door. Suddenly, through the door burst what looked like a cow's heart. The creature stood nearly 1.5 feet tall, and attached to the heart were 4 spindly insect-like legs, clattering across the ground as the abomination ran. Additionally, 4 tentacles grew from the heart, replacing what would otherwise be arteries. Letting out a blood-curdling screech from who knows where, the monster leapt into the air towards Katsuki. Don't kill anyone, Rover. A young voice sounded from down the hall. Soon after, Izuku's face appeared in the doorway. The creature apparently known as Rover changed directions midair, switching targets from the blonde's head to his legs. Reflexively exploding, Katsuki parried Rover away, sending it flying into the wall. I'll kill you! Katsuki yelled at the creature, palms sparking as he threw himself forwards to follow up with another series of attacks on the undefeated enemy. You handle Rover, and I shall capture Midoriya. Ida responded. The creature Midoriya summoned is strong and fast, to be sure, but if there's only one then we have a shot in this fight. He thought, preparing himself in a fighting stance to intercept the boy and defend the target. Izuku ran forwards, eyes locked on the papier-mâché bomb. Oh no you don't. Ida cut in, sending a flying kick the boy's way, leaving him fractions of a second to dodge. Ducking under the attack, Izuku lost his balance and fell to the floor. In response, Ida loomed over him, leg drawn back, and engines revving for a powerful blow. I have got you now, foolish hero. The boy monologued, in true villain fashion. The weapon is our dash. He was interrupted by an explosion thrown directly into his back. Rover bounced off of Ida's back, ricocheting off towards the ceiling like a pinball. Katsuki, in his pursuit of the creature, ran right into Ida. Stumbling, the two boys crashed onto the floor in a heap. Good boy, Rover. Izuku praised. You haven't won yet, stop patting yourself on the back. Katsuki taunted, picking himself up from the ground. Don't forget that you need to touch the weapon to win, and you're not strong enough to get by me. Katsuki punctuated the sentence by throwing a blast into the oncoming form that was Rover. Once again it went flying off across the room. Are you sure about that, Kaken? I thought all I had to do was distract you too? Izuku asked curiously, tilting his head. Distract us? Ida pondered, realization hitting him like a ton of bricks a moment too late. Because at that very moment, Uraraka had finished circling the outskirts of the room and claimed the weapon with a touch. The hero team wins. A tinny voice announced through the room's speakers. Would both teams please report to the lobby? The looks on Katsuki and Ida's faces were priceless, as they watched the girl calmly walk them by to the door, a grin on her face. So that's my plan. What do you think? Izuku asked, holding a large heart with too many appendages in his arms like a puppy. Not bad. Uraraka admitted. She could definitely see the plan working, especially with the added chaos that was Rover. Why make such a complicated plan though? I'm sure you have other options that would let you win this without all the effort. Izuku looked confused, like the girl was missing some crucial piece of information. Because you're my friend? He said, like a question. It wouldn't be nice for me to leave you out of the game. Friend, huh? She thought to herself. Uraraka pondered for a moment, and then sighed aloud. Despite his terrifying nature and tendency to lose limbs, the boy had shown nothing but goodwill to her since they met. So, I just have to scream and run, right? She asked, beginning to smile. Being friends with a green-haired eldritch boy might be fun, right? Izuku's costume design chapter text. Dark Shadow was delighted. From her spot up in the viewing booth for the battle trials, she could clearly see the human that she had recently begun to obsess over. As Izuku ran through the hallways, an organ-shaped creature in tow, Dark Shadow could hardly breathe. Not that she needed to in the first place. She couldn't say why, but the boy had such a familiar feeling to him that she just couldn't take her eyes off him. So, when the boy was knocked to the floor and surrounded by enemies, she couldn't simply sit back and watch. Fumi, we've got to save him. Dark Shadow yelled at the boy she was attached to. He needs our help. Tokoyami side-eyed. The shadow. For the moonlight to shine brightest, it must not be interrupted by a parade of darkness. Thankfully, Dark Shadow spoke Gothic. I know we aren't supposed to interfere or whatever, but what if he gets hurt? The argument was over soon after, as the room of students watched Uraraka come out of nowhere and claim the undefended weapon. They watched their teacher with bated breaths, waiting to hear his announcement. The hero team wins. Yagi called through his microphone. Would both teams please report to the lobby? When Izuku and the rest of his group returned to the lobby, Yagi asked the group of remaining students who they would say the MVP of the match was. Midoriya. Dark Shadow screeched, startling the surrounding students. He was awesome. That's a fine answer, young Shadow? Yagi answered. Does anyone else have any notes? Yaoyorozu raised her hand, and Yagi called on her to give her thoughts. I believe that the MVP of this round was Uraraka. She began. Yagi appeared ready to call on another student for their opinion as well, but the girl continued. Both Bakugo and Ida stayed in the room, giving up the strategic advantage they may have gained by splitting up and buying themselves time. Furthermore, neither was aware of their surroundings, both too focused on Midoriya and his quirk to see through Uraraka's deception. For these reasons, neither member of the villain team deserves the MVP title. And while Midoriya may have been instrumental in the plan, I don't believe he followed the spirit of the assignment perfectly, since leaving himself in a prone state while surrounded by villains is a foolhardy move that only worked out because this was merely an exercise. Finally, Uraraka played her part to perfection, fooling not just the villain team but also us viewers. She didn't put herself in unnecessary danger and claimed the weapon in an efficient manner. Therefore, she is the most deserving of victory. Yagi gaped, mouth opening and closing silently before he could manage a sentence. That's exactly correct, young Yaoyorozu. I couldn't have said it better myself. Changing the subject, Yagi turned back to the screen and displayed pairings for the next match. Team B, Shoto Todoroki and Mizo Shoji, versus Team I, Mashareo Ojiro and Toru Hagakure. The four students left for their building to prepare for the match. In the meantime, Dark Shadow crept closer to Tokoyami to whisper in his ear. Go make friends with him, Fumi. Tokoyami shook his head. The darkness seeks solitude like the night follows the moon. Please. She begged. If you're too shy, I'll go over there myself. Do not go gentle into that good night. The boy hissed back at the shadow. Fine. Dark Shadow pouted, crossing her staticky limbs in front of herself. Then I guess I'll just have to be so cool in our battle that he has no choice but to make friends with us. The second match ended quickly. Todoroki merely froze the entire building solid and marched right into the building to claim the bomb. In the following discussion, the class unanimously agreed that he was the MVP. Tokoyami followed Tsuyu Azui to a spot outside of their exam site. Your quirk is that shadow, right, Karo? Tsuyu asked, looking at her teammate up and down. My ability to revel in the darkness is unmatched by mortals. He responded. I'm just going to pretend I understood that. Tsuyu responded after a moment of awkward silence. Dark Shadow cut in. Don't worry, that building is dark enough that I can go wild, so while I wreck everything you can just claim the weapon in the rubble. She finished proudly, raising her head up as if waiting for praise. That sounds irresponsible, Tsuyu stated, confused. Looking at the clock counting down until the start of their exercise, she came up with an idea. How about we try my plan, Karo? Dark Shadow tugged Tokoyami through the doors to the building and began to grow as she moved further into the shade. With a battle cry, she enveloped Tokoyami and began to rage against the walls, sending rubble flying in every direction. Never had Tokoyami seen Dark Shadow so motivated. Even when cracks in the outer walls formed and light peeked through, she didn't stop her relentless onslaught once. Soon enough, a red-haired boy approached the two, apparently having heard the destruction they were causing from rooms away. I found you! Kirishima yelled, skin shifting into some kind of rocky substance. Fight me like a man! Dark Shadow responded with vigor, slamming tendril upon tendril into Kirishima, bashing him until shards of rock began to chip away from his skin. With one final blow, she slammed him into the wall, leaving a crater behind. That's super manly, Kirishima said before passing out. Tokoyami and Dark Shadow turned away from the boy, looking instead up the stairs in the direction Kirishima had emerged from. Let's go! The shadow bellowed, voice deepened by the increase in size. The pair ran up the stairs and down the hall, stopping as they saw a door covered in tape. With a crash, Dark Shadow broke down the door and barreled into the room. Hanta Siro and Tsuyu Azui were engaged in a battle of agility, with Azui leaping from wall to wall, avoiding the increasing number of tape strands that Siro was shooting into the air. Tokoyami was dragged by Dark Shadow, who simply ignored the obstacles and blasted through the lines of tape. Hey, how'd you get past Kirishima? Siro asked, but it was too late. Victory was assured the moment Tokoyami stepped through the door. With one final battle screech, Dark Shadow swung herself wildly through the air, catching on every piece of tape in the room and ripping them to the floor. Seeing her chance, Azui leapt from the wall and onto the warhead. The hero team wins. Yagi's voice spoke out into the air. Please return to the lobby. We did it, Fumi, Dark Shadow whispered in her partner's ear. We won, so Midoriya's bound to be friends with us now. Tokoyami froze at her words. Did he really want to get mixed up with someone as feared by the whole class as Izuku Midoriya? Well, it looks like he wouldn't have a choice in the matter anyways, if his shadow had anything to say about it. Walking to school the next day, Izuku was met with the sight of a crowd of reporters mobbing UA's gate. As he approached, a reporter broke off from the pack to approach the boy with a question. You there, boy? We've heard reports that a first-year student this year broke the entrance exam record set by All Might over 30 years ago. Do you know anything about that? Izuku's brain stalled, a dumb look overtaking his face. Are they talking about me? He wondered as the reporter prodded the boy with her microphone. All right now, cut that out. A screechy voice called from behind Izuku. Turning, the boy could see a familiar blob of staticky darkness and her attached bird-headed companion. What a mad revelry of darkness, Tokoyami said, greeting the green-haired boy. Izuku tried to stutter out a thank you to the pair, but he was quickly ushered inside, pushed past the crowd of reporters. Once they were safely inside, the two boys slowed their pace and trotted inside quietly. Upon Dark Shadow's nudging, Tokoyami broke the silence. The stars cry out in desolation, they weep for the ignorance of man. Izuku eloquently answered. He says he saw you were having trouble with those reporters. Dark Shadow translated, positioning herself between the boys. And he wanted to make sure you got to class on time. Oh, so that's what he meant. Izuku said, now inside and walking up the stairs to class 1A. Tokoyami says he would love to be friends with you. Dark Shadow stated matter-of-factly. Abominations of the night. Tokoyami cried out, looking betrayed towards the shadow. That was him agreeing with me. She translated. I'd love to, Tokoyami. Izuku responded heartily. He was always ready to make more friends. I should introduce you to my uncle sometime. I feel like you might get along, he said, turning to Dark Shadow. The trio reached the door to class and parted ways to get to their seats. For once, Uraraka didn't shake at the sight of Izuku, although Katsuki appeared to be even more angry at the boy than usual. Ida was pointedly not looking in Izuku's direction, just staring at the wall ahead of him with perfect posture. All right, you nightmare gremlins, Aizawa said, standing up from the floor still cocooned in a yellow sleeping bag. Pick a class president and a vice. You have until the end of the day. That's all. With that, the man slumped back down to the ground and promptly fell asleep under his desk. The class exploded into noise, nearly every student nominating themselves for the president position. It was Ida who brought the chaos down and declared that the matter would be best settled through a democratic election. Being the Class A president at UA would look great on a resume, Izuku thought to himself, scanning the room. But I can't think of anyone that I know would vote for me. Tokoyami might, since we're friends. Looking at the raven-headed boy, Izuku was struck with a revelation. Is that why he asked me to be friends this morning? Did he predict that elections would take place today and befriend me to sway him to my side? That's a brilliant strategic move. Izuku looked at Tokoyami with starry eyes, awestruck at the perceived genius of the boy. Tokoyami just seemed uncomfortable with the attention and kept turning to Dark Shadow as if to say, "Look what you've done. Please write your pick for president on a sheet of paper and pass it up." Ida declared. The student with the highest number of votes will become president, and the runner-up will be vice. Izuku ripped out a page from his notebook and scrawled, "Fumikage Tokoyami," on it. The note was passed to the front, and within the next few minutes, every student had made their decision. Ida scrawled the results on the chalkboard, putting up tallies next to each name as they appeared. Izuku watched with bated breath as one tally was marked down for Tokoyami, only for it to be skipped over as more tallies filled the board. Finally, with 2 votes to go, Tokoyami gained a second vote, and Yaoyorozu got a third. This means that Momo Yaoyorozu will be our class president, with Fumikage Tokoyami as our vice president. Ida announced, not without a hint of disappointment. It was hard to feel too bad for him, however, when the lack of tallies beside his name implied that he didn't even vote for himself. What is this infernal creature, a labyrinth of chaos from the abyss? Tokoyami asked, bewildered that he had managed to get the position when he, too, hadn't even voted for himself. I swear to fulfill my duties as your president to the best of my abilities, Yaoyorozu said primly. Thank you to all of you who voted for me. You'll be great, Tokoyami bro. Kirishima called out from the back of class. You're super manly, I know you'll do great. The rest of the class was quick to follow, all offering their praise towards the two. The cheers were cut off, however, when Aizawa raised his head and shot the students a bloodshot glare. They all shut up. Each of the students remembered how easily their homeroom teacher had sliced off Izuku's limbs during the Quirk apprehension test and weren't eager to find out if the hero name, Erase Your Head, they had heard from whispering second years was just for show. Class 1A spent the rest of the PRD in remarkably silent study. Over here, Izuku heard from across the crowded cafeteria. He turned to see his new friends waving him over to their table. Hey Dark Shadow, Tokoyami. Izuku greeted, sitting down across from the pair. Congrats on your election to VP. The sun set over the desolate winter's desperation. Tokoyami answered, prompting Izuku to turn to Dark Shadow for translation. He's just surprised that he even got elected. The shadow squawked. But enough about this bird brain, we're practically best friends now, right? Can I call you by your first name? Izuku grinned. That sounds great, you can call me Izuku. Can I call you Dark? Dark Shadow squealed and flew in small loops around the table. Yes, yes. Turning to Tokoyami, she whispered, Fumi, I got a nickname and we're best friends now. This means that we'll get to do everything together from now on. Tokoyami put his head in his hands and sighed. He was becoming increasingly aware that he wouldn't have a single moment of silence to brood in his entire high school career. Dark patted the boy's shoulder comfortingly, saying, It's okay, Fumi, I'll share Izuku. You can be best friends with him too, just not as best as me. The conversation was brought to a halt when alarm bells rang out across the cafeteria. Thrown into a sudden panic, the students got up quickly and began a mad dash for the exit. Let's go, Tokoyami, it might be a villain attack. Izuku yelled, trying to be heard above the screaming crowd and sirens. Dark Shadow grabbed Izuku's hand and dragged the pair of boys down the hall and into the crowded hallway. Students were pushing and shoving each other to get out first. It was utter chaos. We need to see what's going on outside. Dark, can you stretch up high to see out the windows? Izuku pleaded with his friend, after getting the wind knocked out of him by a student with a rhinoceros mutant quirk. Can do. Dark chirped, stretching upwards to the windows and peering through them. After a quick glance, she came back down and reported to the two teens. It's just reporters, it looks like they broke through the barrier. Everyone thinks it's a villain attack. At this point someone will get trampled, Izuku thought to himself. I'll calm down the students. Dark, you focus on getting them to leave the building calmly. Izuku shouted, a plan forming itself in his head. We face a wild beast unhindered by the dark. Tokoyami shouted. Yeah, how do you plan on doing that? Everyone's panicking. Dark Shadow interpreted. I'll just make them follow the traffic signs. Izuku explained, prompting a strange look from the other two. In Izuku's hand suddenly appeared a long metal pole, the space around his hand warping and shimmering until it revealed itself with a pop. The pole was even taller than the boy's head, and on the end was a red and white triangle with the word, yield, written on it in English. The moment the sign pole hit the ground, the movement in the room abruptly ceased. Except for Dark Shadow and a handful of kids with extreme mutant quirks, every single student stopped in their tracks and fell silent, a glazed look coming to their eyes. Hurry, Dark, I can't hold this thing up very long. Izuku pleaded, and sure enough, the heavy pole was beginning to tilt, held up only by the quivering boy's body weight pressing against it. Everyone, walk out the door calmly in 2 single-file lines. Dark yelled, and the crowd began to move, smoothly merging into 2 lines and walking down the hallways. As they passed under the doorway they stopped and appeared to gain consciousness again. Most of the students just continued to panic and run once outside of the building, but one boy with a head of wild purple hair turned around. He scanned the hallway he had exited from and caught sight of Izuku and his yield sign. Making direct eye contact, the boy nodded slightly before turning to follow the rest of the crowd as they evacuated the building. Just as the last dozen people left the hallway, the sign clanged to the ground, Izuku falling to his knees beside it. With a wave of his hand and a whisper, the sign was swallowed up by the ground as if it was a tar pit. Tokoyami blinked his eyes, shaking himself out of his stupor. What means of imprisoning the soul? Yeah, sorry Tokoyami. Izuku apologized, already getting the gist of what the boy meant when he spoke. I can't control who the sign affects, we're just lucky that Dark Shadow doesn't have bones. Bones are for the weak. Dark chirped, holding out a limb in the shape of a bicep. Heh, yeah, I hate those things. Izuku agreed, nodding along. Tokoyami looked back and forth between the two, looking confused and very uncomfortable. This confirmed it. He really wouldn't have a moment of peace for the next 3 years. Back in Class 1A, Tokoyami stood before at the blackboard. He would have preferred to stay sitting until school let out in a few minutes, but Dark Shadow had prodded him into making a last-minute announcement. I have decided, she began, that I will be electing myself as vice president. A confused hush fell over the class, broken by Ida. This is unprecedented, he declared, chopping his hand up and down robotically. Never before in this institution's history dash. And Izuku will be the vice president. Dark Shadow finished chipperly, ignoring the boy as she had learned to do in these first few days of school. Ida sputtered, not having anything to say for once. This situation was never mentioned in the student handbook, and he found himself struggling to find a proper response to it. "You'll let us, right, Teach?" Dark asked, turning to the yellow caterpillar lying on the floor. Aizawa groaned. If there were two things he hated, it was politics and drama. "I couldn't care less." He answered honestly. "This president stuff is all just made-up power anyways, so do whatever you want." Dark Shadow whooped in joy. "I'll start making us badges," she declared. The class sat in stunned silence until the bell rang, signaling the end of the day. Somehow, the one student, other than Bakugo or Mineta, that nobody trusted to lead the class hand ended up as vice president. Whatever. They concluded. Izuku did weird stuff and they decided right then to try and not worry about it. After all, it was just made-up power, like Aizawa said. What could possibly go wrong? "So, what kind of shows are you into, Tokoyami?" Izuku asked his new friend, sitting beside him in a rumbling bus. "The darkness is affixed by cosmic horrors unbeknownst to the likes of man." The bird boy responded. "He says The Office and Young Sheldon." Dark clarified. "This guy thinks they're peak media," she whispered under her breath. So cosmic means young, and unbeknownst is a subtle prefix that attaches itself to transitioning verbs. Izuku mumbled aloud, scribbling furiously in his notebook titled, Goth Language Studies. A voice piped up from beside the trio, breaking Izuku out of his trance and Tokoyami away from his silent argument with Dark about the intricacies of Sheldon's development with time. "So Midoriya, Karo, your quirk is a lot like Yaoyorozu's, I've noticed." "So you said." Yaoyorozu pulled the earbud from her ear she was sharing with Jiro. The pair were discussing their taste in music with each other and tuned into the conversation. Tsuyu continued. "I was just wondering if there are limits, Karo. If you can create anything you can imagine, that would make your quirk really powerful." Finally, Yaoyorozu would get to know his secrets. She would never ask her rival for his weaknesses on her own, but coming from the perpetually honest Tsu, he was sure to give away the information. More than anything, she wanted to know what made Izuku tick, and how to defeat him. "Well," Izuku began. "My quirk doesn't create anything, I just summon pre-existing friends. So, I can't just create whatever I imagine. Also, I don't only make objects, I summon living friends too. You saw Rover during the battle trials, and the lake I summoned for the entrance exams, right?" "There's no way," Mina exclaimed from the back of the bus. "None of the stuff you summoned is real. Do you expect me to believe that a lake of blood that makes monsters is just out there somewhere?" "She's correct," Todoroki followed, joining the conversation. "You must be misunderstanding your quirk somehow. Surely nothing you create is real." Izuku frowned. He had spent so long living with his friends that he just couldn't believe that they were merely figments of his imagination. "But when I summon them, I've noticed that I put out a signal. It sounds like a click." To demonstrate, Izuku raised his arms in front of himself and popped his elbows and knuckles. Katsuki flinched visibly, and with shaking fingers, switched off his bone conduction hearing aids using his phone's app. "My quirk uses lipids to create matter," Yaoyorozu interjected. "Maybe the signal is really some material for your quirk. Maybe you aren't summoning anything, you're creating them using electromagnetic frequencies, utilizing the principles of general relativity and the conversion of energy and matter, or something." The girl trailed off, noticing the blank stares of her classmates. "Maybe," Izuku said. He wasn't convinced that his friends were all figments of his imagination. Tokoyami noticed the expression on his friend's face and patted his shoulder comfortingly. "What a mad revelry in the darkness." "Thanks, Tokoyami," Izuku replied. He noticed how much his classmates didn't seem to trust him, even taking the words of others over his own on how his own quirk worked. But on the bright side, Tokoyami and Dark Shadow were by his side, and he could always summon his friends when he needed them. The bus rolled to a halt. "All right, you goblins, get off the bus. Last one off is in charge of cleaning the seats," Aizawa announced from the front seat. Each student in Class 1A scrambled to be first off the bus, and in all the rush Izuku noticed Mineta getting a little too close to the girls he was pushing by for it to be an accident. What a creep, Izuku thought to himself. He may be able to condone murder, but he had standards. Which had nothing to do with Izuku's accidental stumble out of the bus, leading the purple-haired boy to face plant on the concrete below. "Sorry, epithet, I didn't see you there," he yelled, stepping on the boy's head as he hopped out of the bus. Aizawa looked ready to reprimand Izuku, but as the words left his mouth, the teacher's face scrunched towards Mineta and he said nothing. The students continued to file off the bus, Kuda being the last to leave, too shy to push past anyone. Aizawa must have taken pity on the boy, because he declared the punishment a logical ruse, and ushered the crowd through the doors leading into the USD. "I've never been to Universal Studios Japan," Kaminari whispered, an odd look taking over his face. Shiro punched his arm. "Idiot, that's in Osaka. This is probably just some dinky knockoff." "Welcome, hero students." A talking space suit greeted from the lobby of the massive building. "This is the unforeseen simulation joint, where you will learn to rescue civilians from disaster areas." "So, no rides?" Kaminari asked sadly. 13 pinched where the bridge of their nose would be if not for the helmet and sighed. "There's one every year," they said to themselves. Popping their head back up, 13 looked back at the crowd of expectant students. "No, there are no roller coasters here at the USJ. Instead we will be learning how to use our quirk safely in order to minimize collateral damage." The suit's visor appeared to be pointed directly at Izuku as they spoke. "I have great control of my quirk," Izuku thought, rubbing the back of his head nervously. "It's not my fault that some of my friends get a little overexcited sometimes." "This is my quirk, Black Hole," 13 said, continuing. "It's a power great for rescue heroics, since it can be used to destroy rubble in earthquake zones." With that, they tossed a rock from their pocket into the air and quickly destroyed it using a hovering ball that seemed to absorb all light. Turning back to the class, the space suit took on a more serious look. "But it can just as easily be used to kill." 13 reached into their other pocket as if searching for something, then slapped their head, remembering something suddenly. "Oh yeah, Netsu said no more live demonstrations on mice." They whispered, too quiet for any students to hear except for Jiro, who paled at the thought. "One more thing," 13 continued, "or maybe 2 things, no? 3? 4? I guess I have a whole list of things to mention." The hero's rant was cut off by the appearance of a black and purple mist. It came pouring from the fountain in the middle of the lobby, enveloping the floor in a thick cover of smoke. "Mr. Aizawa, is this a part of the demonstration?" Yaoyorozu asked worriedly. The 2 heroes didn't respond, staring at the smoke as it billowed with their guards raised. Suddenly, a head emerged from the portal, one covered with long, light blue hair and a severed hand. That head became shoulders, and the shoulders a torso, as the lanky figure arose from the shadows. "Frickin', cut out your little prank, nerd." Katsuki hissed towards Izuku, though he didn't break eye contact with the man. "Nobody's laughing." But Izuku was as confused as anyone else, watching as more figures emerged from the mist. Several dozen intimidating figures stepped from the portal of mist, the most unsettling of the lot being a tall, muscular figure, skin covered in small black scales with a sharp beak and exposed organs. As it emerged from the portal, the mist shrunk down into a humanoid form with glowing yellow eyes and dressed in business attire. "Get back!" Aizawa yelled, eyes glowing red and gray, scarf weightlessly flying from around his neck, now serving as a barrier to keep his students behind himself. Well, a scratchy voice announced. Izuku scanned the crowd and saw that it was the first figure to appear speaking, the one with the severed hands. "If it isn't a class of heroes. I heard down the grapevine that some kind of wonder kid was going to be here today. Hand him over so that I can kill him." Izuku bristled. "First off, rude. You don't just ask to kill someone you've hardly even met," he thought. As it turned out, the 3rd time wasn't the charm, the boy displaying an unsettling lack of fear towards a strange man looking to harm him once again. During the monologue, Aizawa whipped out his pager and clicked a few buttons, but seemed angry at the results on the screen. "Darn it. The communications are out. No signals getting out. 13, get the students out while I fight the villains." "Mr. Aizawa, you can't." Kaminari protested. "Didn't you hear 13? Your quirk is too dangerous to use on them, they die. Aizawa paused for a single moment, but quickly shrugged off the odd comment and ran towards the group of villains, eyes still glowing red. Jumping into action, the space hero turned to the panicking group and started ushering them towards the door. The students ran to the door, 13 in tow, but were stopped by a sudden wall of black mist. Now, I can't have the young master's target escaping now, can I? A voice taunted from the mist. Mr. Villain, could you please move? We're trying to get by. Izuku asked politely, causing his classmates to turn to him, bewildered expressions on their faces. I'm afraid not, young man. The mist answered. Dang, I really thought that would work. Mom always says to ask strangers politely and they'll stop blocking doorways. The boy thought. If asking politely won't do it, maybe you can try a taste of my quirk. 13 yelled, holding up a finger towards the wall of mist. As they did, a black hole appeared and began to swallow up the fog. Unfazed, the mist villain merely created a cloud of mist behind the hero, which was apparently connected as a portal to his main body, as the suction force of their quirk sent 13 careening backwards towards the cloud. The edges of their costume began to tear, strips of flesh and streams of blood visible as they flew into the portal and were into the black hole. The hero cut off their quirk but was too late, the damage had been done. They sunk to the floor with a cry of pain and were immediately surrounded by Uraraka and Todoroki, who began applying pressure to the wound and attempting emergency aid for the wounded hero. A pitiful attempt to defeat me. The mist man mocked, spreading out his body into a wider shape and encircling the group of students. The smoke rose up, consuming them. Thinking fast, Yaoyorozu reached out and shoved Ida out of the ring of mist. Run to Yue, get more heroes. She hissed, careful not to tip off the villain to her plan. As she finished her sentence, the smoke rose up and covered her eyes. Ida scrambled into a bush out of view, deciding to follow the orders of his class president, as was outlined in the UA student handbook, rather than making a foolhardy attempt to fight the villains. As the smoke covered Izuku's eyes, he caught sight once more of the hulking bird creature, standing silently by the fountain, lifeless eyes just staring at the proceedings. It was ominous, sure, but more than that, something about the beast felt familiar to the boy, although he couldn't place where from. He was drawn out of his musings by the twisting sensation in his stomach as the mist swallowed him completely, and he found himself high in the air, hurtling downwards towards what looked like a lake. A pink appendage wrapped around the boy's waist and dragged him quickly through the air before he had the chance to react. When the dizziness wore off, he found himself in the arms of Tsuyu Azui, her long tongue the apparent culprit of his forceful removal from the airspace and onto the deck of a boat. A screaming sound intensified above the pair, ending in a resounding smack as the small form of Mineta slammed face first onto the ship deck. His arm was bent uncomfortably behind his back, hand hanging above his head limply. That looks like it hurt, Karo. Tsuyu commented, putting a finger to her cheek and setting down Izuku. Izuku prodded the small boy with his foot but got no response. He leaned down and pressed a finger to his neck, feeling a slight pulse. He's unconscious, Izuku stated. Izuku and Tsuyu shared a knowing glance, each having witnessed Mineta's character, and decided that he would be just fine on the floor. The pair turned from the boy and began to examine their surroundings. They seemed to be on the deck of a ship, but were still in the USJ building, the edges of the lobby area they came from visible from where they stood. Looking at the pool of water the boat floated in, they saw a horde of angry people, all with seemingly fish-related quirks. A man with a shark mutation snapped his teeth menacingly when he caught sight of the boy. We need to get out of here before the villains start climbing the hull, Karo. Tsuyu croaked. Midoriya, can you summon something helpful? Sure, Tsuyu. Izuku answered, focusing on summoning something that fought well in water. Upon the final click, Tsuyu braced herself, but there was no visible indication that the quirk had done anything. So, is your summon invisible or? The girl trailed off, looking around for any hint of a strange creature or object. And no, Izuku answered, flustered. It didn't work. I can't summon anything. Suddenly feeling very empty, the boy began to panic, sinking to the deck and clutching his hair tightly. Why can't I reach my friends? Izuku thought to himself, wildly searching his mind for clues on how this could be happening. Could they be ignoring me? Do they hate me now too? Don't worry about it, Midoriya. Tsuyu comforted, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. The communication may be broken, but I saw that Ida escaped to get the heroes, so all we have to do is stay put and we'll be saved. The communication is broken, Izuku mentally repeated to himself, then came to a sudden realization. That's it, the boy exclaimed, standing up. I can't use my quirk because someone is blocking signals. I knew that my quirk really summons things, this proves it. Not the time and place, Kero. Tsuyu groaned. Her words were punctuated by the sound of metal scraping, of villains scratching their long, razor-sharp talons against the watercraft. Maybe we actually won't be safe here, Kero. We need a way to get off the ship to safety, she declared. Izuku took stock of his surroundings and turned back to the girl. Okay, here's the plan. Aizawa danced around the battlefield, dodging bullets and punches like a bullfighter dodges cattle. He was steadily working through the crowd of villains, but it seemed like for every one that he took out, 3 more would pour in to take their place. The ringleader apparently cackled like a madman, watching his enemy tire of fighting so many villains. Looks like the hero school's final boss is nothing but a level 1 slime who can't take on a few measly villains. Shigaraki taunted, grinning beneath his hand. Shipmask. You're the leader, right? Aizawa asked, narrowly avoiding a lobster claw slicing at his neck. Then I don't need to take them all out, just you. The hero lunged for Shigaraki, eyes glowing red to prevent the villain from using his quirk whatever it may be. With the startling efficiency of a veteran pro hero, Eraserhead quickly wrapped his enemy up in his capture scarf. Shigaraki seemed mostly unfazed, only smiling at the hero as he was bound. Bad decision, Eraser. He jeered. I've been watching you fight, and you can only keep up your little disappearing trick for 34 seconds. Which means that you should be hitting your limit right about. Eraserhead struggled to keep his eyes open, but between the dust and the length of time he had been holding his eyelids up, it was impossible. So he blinked. Now. Shigaraki grinned, dissolving the capture scarf from his body. The pieces of memory metal, engineered to hold several tons of weight without breaking, decayed into thousands of specks of dust in an instant. Shigaraki quickly moved his hand up to the hero's face, grabbing his goggles with all 5 fingers. But just as the yellow metal flaked away, the glow started back up in Eraserhead's eyes, halting the process. This hacker! Shigaraki swore under his breath and turned to the hulking beast that maintained an ominous silence throughout the battle. Nomu, kill this fool. In an instant, Eraserhead lost sight of the beast. A cloud of dust was all that remained where it was standing. Just as suddenly he found himself being thrown forwards at Mach speeds towards the ground. The man's face slammed into the ground, and he could feel his nose break, and his 2 front teeth forcibly relocated up into his gums. He shook as he lay on the ground, hot blood flowing from his mouth and onto the ground, every nerve in his face screaming at him. Before he could come to his senses, Eraserhead felt himself being lifted into the air by his hair, the fist holding him up quickly slamming his face into the ground once more. Aizawa could feel himself losing consciousness, from either shock or concussion, he didn't know. But as the Nomu lifted his head from the ground to deliver one final blow, through his half-lidded eyes the teacher saw 2 of his students, wading in the lake barely a dozen meters from himself. Standing above them was Shigaraki, hand just inches away from Azui's face. With the last dregs of strength in himself, Shoyuta Aizawa activated his quirk. By some miracle, Tsuyu had managed to carry Izuku over the shipwreck area with a quirk-enhanced leap. It was the first proposal Izuku made while brainstorming, but it was deemed unusable since the girl couldn't carry the weight of Izuku and Mineta, not to mention the fact that any of the villains below could potentially have quirks which could knock them out of the air. It was only when the conversation moved to possibly using a distraction to make their escape that Tsuyu had an epiphany. Say, Midoriya, being a hero is all about sacrificing yourself to save a greater number, right, Kero? Izuku scratched his head thoughtfully. I suppose so. He conceded. Then I say we hold a vote. All in favor of Mineta getting to do some extra credit hero work. Tsuyu cheekily proposed. If there was one thing Izuku liked, it was extra credit. He raised his hand. Tsuyu raised hers. Mineta's was still held above his head awkwardly. It's unanimous. I guess we're doing your plan, Tsu. Izuku tallied, looking over the group. Izuku and Tsuyu lugged the unconscious form of Mineta Minoru to the side of the ship. As he appeared, the villain's attention was immediately on the boy. Gracefully, he flew through the air, like a baby bird taking flight for the first time. Mineta hit the water with a sploosh and was immediately swallowed up by white foam and dozens of villains. As he was doused, he awoke and began panicking helplessly in the water. None of the villains happened to notice the fast disappearing figures of two students dressed in green, as they made a dash for safety through the air. Landing a few dozen meters away from the nearest villain, Tsuyu quickly dove underwater and swiftly swam in the direction of the lobby. After she deemed them far enough away, the girl resurfaced, letting Izuku take a few shaky breaths, coughing as he did. "Oh yeah, Kero," Tsuyu said, waiting for Izuku to catch his breath. "I forget that most people can't hold their breath that long. Sorry about that, Kero." "No worries, Tsu," he said, waving her off. "But that does remind me, do you think Mineta's going to drown?" Tsuyu shrugged. "He didn't mention whether he could swim during our meeting." That's a good point. He'll be fine then." Izuku nodded, voice getting quieter as the two approached the shoreline leading up to some kind of ongoing battle. They reached the shore, and Tsuyu gasped, eyes wide as she watched their teacher being grabbed by some kind of monster with an exposed brain and slammed into the ground violently. Well, a scratchy voice sounded from near the pair, stealing their attention away from their teacher's plight. "If it isn't two stream snipers, here to try and de-aggro my kill." In a flash, the man covered in severed hands leapt forward, hand outstretched to Tsuyu's face, as the girl sat frozen in terror. All 5 fingers grasped the girl's head, but to the villain's apparent surprise, nothing happened. "Ugh, I forgot about this noob's cheat ability," Shigaraki said, releasing the girl and turning to the prone form of Eraserhead. "Nomu, finish him off." Izuku caught sight of the Nomu, his gaze locking for a moment on the pitch-black eyes of the beast. He knew he needed to do something, but he was just too far away, and his quirk was useless right now. So, he watched in horror as it lifted his teacher into the air by his hair, blood dripping down the man's chin and eyes, face swollen in a motley rainbow of bruises. It prepared to slam his head into the ground, a move that would surely end the life of the man. Izuku had grown to respect a man so selfless he would lay down his life to protect his students without complaint. With nothing else to do, Izuku begged. "Stop!" He screamed, throat cracking and eyes pricking at the edges with tears. And the beast? It froze. The thought ran through the Nomu's broken mind, the landscape of which was too shattered to form complex thought. All that remained were orders. Destroy. The young master told Nomu to kill, and he killed. He told it to fight, and he fought. That was the way of the world. Crush. Since the day the Frankenstein-esque cluster of bodies had been brought to life by that infernal green goo, that was the only rule it had ever known. The only remaining fragments of will held by the victim's consciousness merely begged to be freed from this life of havoc, to choose a new path. Murder. Then suddenly, as if a light at the end of a tunnel, a new voice appeared, and a new choice was presented. And the Nomu froze. With wide eyes, Izuku watched as the Nomu held his teacher's head just inches from the ground. Shigaraki appeared to be just as shocked. "Don't stop, Nomu," the villain demanded, snarling. "I told you to end that fool." The creature's arm shook slightly, wide bird-like eyes flickering back and forth between Izuku and its master. "Put him down, please," Izuku begged, hoping to be as lucky as he was the first time. To the collective shock of all witnesses including Tsuyu, who was watching Izuku with wider eyes than usual, the Nomu set Aizawa on the ground gently. The man made no move to get up, drifting somewhere between unconscious and delirious. "Nomu!" Shigaraki screeched, the last of his temper lost as he screamed out orders. "Kill them now." But the beast did not move, gaze now firmly locked on the boy. When Izuku saw the creature's eyes up close, he didn't know why he couldn't see it before. The scales, the exposed flesh and reckless, brutal fighting style that was only possible with immense regeneration and strength. This was Izuku's pet lizard. Well, that wasn't quite accurate. Izuku's pet lizard was 6 feet long, with dark scales and a heaping of exposed organs. It had near unlimited regeneration and was the boy's favorite friend as a young child. But one day when Izuku was 7 years old, Lizzo refused to come when the boy called. Day and night, Izuku would use his quirk, but no matter how many teapots or extra-dimensional portals he opened, he couldn't reach Lizzo. Eventually his mother had to sit him down and explain that sometimes pets can die, just like people. And while it was sad to see them go, it helped to know that wherever they were they had found peace. This mollified the boy, and so he grew up, memories fading into haze about his pet lizard. So, while this Nomu may not be Lizzo, the uncanny resemblance made Izuku's skin crawl, the tortured look behind its eyes standing out on the myriad of features the boy recognized. "You want to go back to the lab, huh, you beast?" Shigaraki taunted, hand grabbing the arm of the beast and watching the skin shrivel as fast as new muscle fibers grew in to replace them. The boy didn't quite understand yet, but he knew one thing. For the first time in years, Izuku Midoriya was truly angry. "Kill him," Izuku ordered the Nomu. There was not a speck of empathy in the boy's words, giving the order as if asking for an extra order of rice. Tsuyu's breath caught in her throat, and she silently removed the hand she had kept on Izuku's arm as they crouched in the shallow water. Shigaraki screamed as the monster that had always patiently taken whatever torture he could hand out grabbed him by the wrist, squeezing it until the limb turned blue. "I can't allow you to do that, brother," the mist villain said, opening up a portal between the two. Just as quickly, the portal snapped closed, a black, scaly hand severing from its owner, though not letting go of Shigaraki's arm even after it had been detached. "We must evacuate, young master. I'm not leaving until I kill that brat who stole my Nomu." The villain hissed back, eyes locked on Izuku. Nomu screeched, enraged, and threw itself wholly at the villain. Its arm had regenerated quickly and was flying towards its target. Shigaraki dodged the brunt of the impact, but the Nomu managed to clip him with its shoulder and sent him flying into a wall. The villain slumped to the floor, unconscious. Kurogyri warped over to the man, swallowing him up in a shroud of mist. "Farewell," he said simply before the yellow eyes disappeared. The Nomu ran forwards to intercept the pair but was just slightly too late, his clawed hands swiping through empty smoke in the space Kurogyri used to be. The Nomu turned to Izuku and made a pitiful-sounding noise. If Shigaraki's reactions meant anything, Izuku was willing to bet that the creature wasn't used to failing to carry out orders. "It's fine, we'll get them next time," Izuku comforted, and the Nomu's blank expression relaxed slightly. "For now, why don't you clean up the villains who are left? Don't kill them, just disarm them." The Nomu turned to the crowd of straggler villains, those not dispatched by Eraserhead. A man with what looked like guns for finger panicked and ran in the opposite direction, realizing in that moment that he wasn't getting paid enough to deal with whatever that thing was. He was the creature's first target. In a flash, the beast was off to round up his prey. Turning to Tyu, who was staring at the boy with mouth agape, he asked, "Can you help me lift Aizawa-sensei to the door? He and 13 need medical attention." Her mouth closed, then opened, then closed again. Finally, she regained some composure and nodded, climbing out of the pool. Together the pair hefted their teacher into their arms, careful not to jostle his injuries. As they made the trek up the stairs to the door, the sounds of gunshots, screams, and snapping bones rang out behind them. In shock, Tsuyu was silent the entire time, helping Izuku bandage and disinfect injuries, but not saying a word otherwise. After a minute of this, the door slammed open beside the pair, prompting them to jump up in surprise. Instead of the return of Shigaraki, or a new horde of villains, like they expected, they were greeted with the sight of Yagi Tashinori, albeit looking slightly more muscular than usual. Yagi wasn't smiling. Then again, he rarely smiled around Izuku, so it wasn't really that unusual. "I have arrived," he announced, looking around for imminent threats. "Down here," Izuku piped up. Yagi turned his head downwards and caught sight of the boy. "Aizawa-sensei and 13 are both injured, but Sue and I have it covered. If the rest of the class is like us, then they got teleported to the rescue zones and are surrounded by villains. Izuku explained. Yagi looked like he wanted to argue, not trusting the boy's word after the last time, but the pleading look in Suyu's eyes convinced him. All right, leave it to me. Your classmates are in good hands. With that, Yagi leapt into the air, leaving a cloud of dust on a collision course with the avalanche zone. Waigi-sensei's quirk is just like All Might's. Suyu choked out and began to sob. Thick tears ran down her face as the full reality of the day crashed into her. Help may have arrived, but it didn't feel like the war was over. More like it had just begun. Shirohanta climbed up the ridge between the landslide zone and the main lobby slowly and arduously. He didn't want to alert any villains to his position, especially after he had barely escaped them moments prior by swinging through the air, so he relegated his quirk to making small strips of tape to assist in scaling the sheer cliff. As he peeked his head over the ledge, he was greeted with the sight of a pool of blood. What the scotch? He accidentally cursed, then quickly realized his mistake and covered his mouth with a precisely aimed strip of tape. But his exclamation drew no attention whatsoever. In fact, the area that had just been filled to the brim with villains was now entirely silent. After a few tense moments, Shiro peeked his head over the ledge once more. What he saw was dozens of bodies, all strewn across the floor in various poses. Lying beside the bodies were twice the number of severed limbs. Every single villain on the floor had both had their arms twisted into a knot, their limbs dropped on the floor in a pile of blood and shattered bone as if they were broken chew toys. Shiro had only one explanation for the scene before him. Their teacher had been here. At least he didn't erase any heads. Izuku looked up from the bandaged figures of 13 and Eraserhead to see the face of the Nomu, eyes peering at him from behind the drop-off point into the main lobby. Its eyes were questioning as if searching for orders. But Izuku had nothing left for his new friend to do, so he merely told it what he told all its summoned friends. Thanks, you can go now. The Nomu tilted its head to the side, not quite understanding. I'm saying you're free. Izuku clarified. Go, live your life how you want to. The Nomu turned its head into the air and crouched. Like a spring had launched, it flew into the air with a rush of air, breaking through the glass ceiling of the training center. Glass rained down on the villains it left behind, victims of the creature's take on disarming. Midoriya, are you able to control that monster? The one that tried to kill Sensei? Kind of, Izuku trailed off. It's more like it listens to me. Like an old friend. Tsu nodded curtly, ducking her head further down out of sight for the boy. She didn't say another word to Izuku, even after police and paramedics arrived. Neither did she come to school the next day. In a bar on the bad side of town in Yokohama, a cloud of purple mist swirled into existence. From it, yellow eyes and a crisp business suit emerged. A flat cloud grew out of the main body, from which the limp body of Shigaraki dropped to the ground. The ancient television in the room's corner flickered to life, showing a screen of static. How did your field trip go, young Tamura? You succeeded, I hope. A voice spoke from the screen. Kurogyri answered for his unresponsive ward. The young master failed and is in need of medical attention. We suffered catastrophic damages at the hands of our enemies. The voice on screen merely chuckled, apparently unworried about the fate of his student. I'll send the doctor in to pick him up soon. He spoke. Now then, Kurogyri, how did the mission go? Did you see anything strange, anything unnatural? Kurogyri knew he couldn't give everything away to the villain. While his memories may be gone and a life of villainy all he knew, he just couldn't bring himself to condemn a child to death if he could help it. No, Kurogyri answered. Feeling that this wouldn't be enough for his master, he followed with, one student did manage to take control of my brother's scent with Tamura, however. It, along with the hired guns, were all left behind. Kurogyri could practically feel the grin of the face behind the screen. That student, I want him brought to me. He declared. Wouldn't it be better to allow young Tamura to capture the boy on his own, following your plan to bolster his confidence? Kurogyri reasoned, knowing that if he were to be ordered to collect the boy, his warping ability would make the operation quick and effortless. He knew what happened to the subjects the master gave to the doctor. In the best-case scenario, they might keep some life and consciousness like himself, though more likely that boy would be deformed into a lifeless corpse, puppet through a tortured existence. Kurogyari may not want for anyone to suffer the same fate he had, but knew that he couldn't refuse an order. The voice pondered for a moment. I suppose that the child is going nowhere as things stand. All right then, Kurogyari, when Thaumiel awakens, have him develop a new plan to capture the target, so this time, make sure you bring him home. With that ultimatum, the screen clicked off. Kurogyari stared at his foggy hands, devoid of substance, and wished he could escape this life. His memories may be long gone, but on good days he could feel remnants of a desire to help, to protect. He wouldn't be protecting that boy who had asked him to stand aside so politely. Kurogyari wished he could cry, could lose these feelings by letting tears run down his face, but he had lost the ability to do so long ago. For someone with the power to go anywhere in the world in an instant, Kurogyari felt trapped. Director Paul Legge was not having a good day. First, he had been answering emails and phone calls all day about his pet project, SCPs. Ever since this particular anomaly was discovered, he had been fighting to keep its classification Thaumiel. Not only were other researchers and directors clamoring to reclassify SCP-8502 as Euclid, or even Keter, they were even threatening to send in their own agents or lethal force to contain it. Still, Paul saw the potential in this anomaly. Thaumiel-class anomalies are few and far between, and he knew more than anyone that ever since the SCP-3396 containment breach, the role of the Foundation was becoming more and more difficult, the line between humanity and anomaly more blurred. But 8502 gave an answer. Not only could it be used to manipulate the actions and minds of anomalies, but its abilities didn't work on 3,396-1 instances, proving that the abilities they granted don't remove the humanity of the subjects that possess them. Not everyone shared Paul's opinions, however, so he sighed when his phone rang again for the 16th time that day. Yes? He asked. Director Paul Legge here. He heard the voice on the other end and nearly dropped the phone in shock. After all, it wasn't often that the agent personally assigned to observing SCP-8502 would call. I understand, Paul said, nodding. Suddenly his eyes opened wide in shock. What do you mean 682 could be alive? After a moment of tense silence, Paul stroked his beard with a worried look on his face. It's been thought lost for years. It must have been picked up by whatever organization was behind this attack. Now that it's loose, we'll send out a strike team to pick it up. Although whether we can is another question entirely. The darn reptile always has a way of escaping whatever box we can make for it. Paul listened once more, face wistful as he heard the voice on the other end. Yeah, I agree. 8502 was the perfect box. Which is why, Paul said, looking out the window, we need to bring him home. When Izawa walked into Class 1A the next day, he was met with the sight of the most orderly classroom he had seen in all his years of teaching. At first, he'd like to have attributed the order to his godson, or to the class rep, but that wouldn't explain the lack of eye contact he got from the class. Apart from Midoriya, who seemed chipper as usual. Izawa's eyes caught Kaminari's for an instant, only for the boy to yelp and quickly turn his head to be facing his desk, neck ramrod straight. Well, they must still be spooked from the attack yesterday. A morning to all of you. Izawa greeted. Now that everyone's here, we'll get started with today's lesson. But Sensei, Izuku piped up. Tsu's not here yet? The class turned to the room's lone empty desk, and sure enough, Tsuyu was nowhere to be seen. If you mean Azui, she is taking a mental health day. Not all scars are physical, and it's only natural for you to feel anxious after what you've just been through. The class looked at the empty seat worriedly. Uraraka and Izuku seemed especially anxious hearing the news. But look on the bright side, the teacher continued. In a few short days UA will be holding a sports festival. The oppressive atmosphere quickly turned into cheers. Feeling that it was too early in the morning to deal with this, Izawa sent his students a quirk-infused glare to shut them up, but at the mere sight of his red eyes their cheering turned into screaming, then silence. Bewildered, the man cut off erasure. Observing the chaotic scene, he saw that all his students but Ida, Todoroki, Bakugo, and Izuku were all taking defensive postures, most covering their heads or hiding out of sight. Kaminari in particular was fully under his desk, quaking in his boots. The hero just stood still, bewildered. Eventually, he came to a conclusion. I don't know what they're feeding kids these days. Back in my day when I erased someone's quirk, they called me a villain at worst. Is this the quirk singularity theory I've heard about? It's like they're as attached to their quirks as they are their limbs. All right, back in your seats. Kaminari flew back into his chair so fast you'd think he had a time-stopping quirk. Today's lesson is on quirk discrimination and ethics. After the following 4-hour lecture, lunch, math class with ectoplasm and English with present mic, the end-of-day bell rang. Before the 1A students made to leave, the door to class burst open. In the open doorway stood the smug form of Nito Monoma, leading a pack of students from the first-year classes. Attention, hero wannabes. The blonde boy announced. I'm sure you heard about the upcoming sports festival, so I'm here to remind you not to get any big heads after your little villain attack, because Class 1B is going to come out on top. Ida was furious at the boy's declaration and looked to be about to bite back, but was beaten to the punch by Izuku? Don't you realize how insensitive that is? Izuku asked calmly, standing from his seat and facing Monoma. One of our classmates is no longer with us. Izuku gestured to Tsuyu's empty chair, and the blood drained from Monoma's face. Do you have any idea what that's like for us? For me? The boy asked, shaking his head sadly. Of course, Tsuyu wasn't dead and Izuku knew it. He was referring to the fact that since Tsu was out of class that day, he'd had to take notes on Aizawa's lecture and all the other classes for her. His hand twinged in pain from all the furious scribbling he had done. Maybe next time you'll remember that your words have consequences. Izuku sat down, leaving the room speechless. Class 1A was stunned at what appeared to be the blatant lie, although Aizawa was always happy to mess with Vlad and his brood, and the hallway crowd tried to stutter out some form of apology, claiming that they didn't know. Even Monoma seemed too stunned to come up with a rude comeback. Guess that means a spot opened up for me. A voice said from the back of the crowd. Pushing himself to the front, Shinso Hitoshi appeared. You hero students should watch out, because I'm going to beat you all in the sports festival. Taking one final look over Class 1A, Hitoshi said, I came to see potential heroes, but all I see is a bunch of egomaniacs. The only one I respect is that one. Hitoshi pointed a finger at Izuku, who made a face and thought, what did I do? Consider this my declaration of war. With that, Hitoshi turned and walked away, leaving a room of stunned students and a hallway of stunned, abashed students. Welcome in, dear. Tsu is in her room resting. Belle Ajui greeted. Uraraka stood on her doorstep, wringing her hands nervously. Satsuki will show you there. A young girl peeked out from behind her mother and smiled at Uraraka. You're Tsu's friend, right? Come on, her room's over this way, Karo. Uraraka nodded politely at her host and slipped off her shoes at the door. Padding softly down the hall decorated heavily with frog and toad-themed decor, the pair stopped at a door labeled Tsuyu, with a cartoonish frog sticker on the nameplate emphasizing the label. This is her room. Satsuki said, now I'm going to go play video games. Saturday doesn't last forever, and this sounds boring. Turning, the girl skipped off down the hall away from Uraraka. I guess Tsu's brutal honesty runs in the family. Uraraka giggled to herself. She knocked on the door, and after a moment a quiet voice responded. Come in, Karo. Tsuyu croaked. Uraraka cracked the door open and noted that the light was switched off. She walked in quietly, and a humidifier must have been running because it felt like walking into a curtain of sweat. Tsu? Uraraka asked quietly, spotting what looked to be a human-shaped mound under the blankets of her bed in the dimly lit room. Uraraka, I didn't know it was you. Sorry, Karo, I usually turn off the climate when I have guests. Tsuyu said, lifting the blankets around her head to reveal her face. Tsuyu's eyes were puffy and red, like she'd been crying recently. Are you alright? You didn't come into class yesterday, so I was worried. Izuku made you notes. Tsuyu flinched at the name, though it went unnoticed as Uraraka reached into her bag and pulled out a thin folder of papers. I couldn't face him. Not after the attack. So you said, face who? Uraraka placed the notes on her friend's desk. I thought you just needed a mental health day? So you shook her head. At the USJ? Midoriya controlled that monster. I think he was involved with the villains, Karo. Uraraka felt the news hit her like a truck. Sure, Izuku might come off as strange, but to associate with villains, no, wait, she could totally see it. Still, Uraraka tried to defend her friend. He was controlling a monster? That's what his quirk does, right? So you shook her head. No, he didn't summon this one. It was the big bird monster that came with the villains. It was what injured Aizawa-sensei, and the girl's voice cracked as she struggled to continue. I watched it. It ripped the arms off every single villain in there. It wasn't just a villain, it was a monster. Tsuyu turned her face to her friend and locked eyes directly with the girl. And Midoriya controlled it. He told it to disarm them, and it did. Then he told it to leave. That's why it escaped. Uraraka shook her head defiantly. No. Aizawa was the one who took off those villains' arms, Shiro told me. What? Uraraka asked as the silence between the two stretched on too long. No, it's just that I thought you said our teacher brutally injured several dozen villains. I must have had something in my ear, Karo. Tsuyu said, tapping her ear as if to shake out the mystery blockage. Well, yeah, like he did to Midoriya during the quirk apprehension exam. His quirk removes limbs. That's why he's called Erase Your Head. Uraraka said. Tsuyu tilted her head. No, his name is Eraserhead. His quirk is Erasure, and it erases quirks. I'm not sure why Erasure had that affect Midoriya, Karo, but he wasn't responsible for the USJ villains. Did you really think UA would employ a hero who has no regard for collateral damage? When you put it that way, Uraraka laughed awkwardly. The point is, Tsuyu started, getting the conversation back on track, is that Midoriya isn't as innocent as he says he is, Karo. I'd be careful around him from now on. Uraraka gulped. If you say so, Tsu. The girl didn't totally believe Tsuyu's story just yet, but she did plan on having a long chat with Izuku the next time they met. She was going to get to the bottom of this.